Chapter 686, Tattered Old Treasure Chest. They summoned a companion? Shi Feng frowned as he saw the Lord-ranked One-Horn Lion King. Monsters at the top of the world were already much stronger than monsters one normally found in Starmoon Kingdom. In addition to the environmental effects, dealing with these monsters would be quite challenging. In the current God's domain, there had yet to be a single player capable of soloing the level 45 Lord-ranked One-Horn Lion King. Even if Shi Feng activated twofold Berserk, he would not have a shred of hope of defeating the level 45 Lord. Aside from its 4 million HP, Shi Feng also had no information on the boss's skills. If it summoned another Lord, it would even be difficult to escape with his life. The One-Horn Lion King gave Shi Feng no opportunity to consider his situation. Lifting one of its massive paws, the Lion King suddenly transformed into an afterimage as it dashed towards Shi Feng like a gust of wind. Its speed could match Shi Feng's when he had Windwalk activated. It took only an instant for the massive Lion King to cross more than 20 yards, its paws sending dirt and snow into the air. So much destructive power. Shi Feng immediately used Abyssal Bind, not daring to be careless. After the Abyssal Blade had evolved, all of its skills had reached Tier 1. A Lord-ranked monster was the equivalent of a Tier 2 class. With only a difference of one tier, Abyssal Bind could exert a large fraction of its effects. Shio. 12 pitch-black chains appeared out of thin air, instantly binding the One-Horn Lion King's limbs, forcing the Lord to halt its charge. The Lion King bellowed in rage as it struggled against its bindings. If Shi Feng had taken on this fight before the Abyssal Blade had evolved, the One-Horn Lion King would have easily freed itself from Abyssal Bind. However, no matter how much strength it exerted, it could not move an inch. The most it managed was cause the chains to tremble slightly. Although the chains showed signs of breaking, it would still be some time before they would shatter. I can finally use Abyssal Bind again. Shi Feng was quite satisfied with this outcome. The stronger the monster was, the weaker the effects of Abyssal Bind would become. Hence, he rarely used Abyssal Bind in his fights anymore. Now that the skill had regained its usefulness, he would have another card against powerful monsters. However, Shi Feng did not dare to tarry any longer as he activated Windwalk and fled. Initially, Abyssal Bind could prevent a target from moving for 4 seconds. Against the One-Horn Lion King, however, he'd be lucky if the skill lasted 2 seconds. If utilized properly, he could put quite some distance between himself and the Lord. Sure enough, 2 seconds after Shi Feng activated Abyssal Bind, the One-Horn Lion King broke free from its restraints. Without hesitation, the Lion King chased after its prey. Like so, one man and one beast ran through the snowy forest. Although Shi Feng had attracted the attention of several monsters during his escape, he easily threw them off with his speed. The only monster he could not shake off was the One-Horn Lion King. Fortunately, the Lion King was not a speed-type lord. After activating Windwalk, Shi Feng's speed was roughly equal to the Lion King's. Hence, the Lion King could not close the distance he had created during his 2-second head start. It won't do to continue running like this. I haven't seen any flying-type monsters so far, so it should be fine to use Wind Rider. While Shi Feng fled, he searched for any movement in the air. The ability to fly was a massive advantage against monsters. However, as players reached higher levels, many high-level maps would also contain flying-type monsters. If players encountered such a monster, escape would not be an option. They either defeated the flying monster chasing after them or said monster claimed their life. It would take a miracle to escape from a flying monster. The top of the world was known for being an area that only experts could challenge. One would find it difficult to survive even the low-level regions of this place. Fortunately, Shi Feng also had the 7 Luminaries ring. He considered himself to be someone who was quite good at escaping. However, even Shi Feng did not dare to use his skills at the top of the world casually, as a single misuse might get him killed. After confirming that he saw no threat above him, Shi Feng activated Wind Rider and soared into the sky. Meanwhile, the One-Horn Lion King could only roar in frustration as it watched its prey escape its clutches. Although Shi Feng was only level 32, the 220% increase in movement speed that Wind Rider provided made him faster than even a level 45 lord. The location marked on the elemental core showed that Solomon's treasure was in Mount Sogar's core area. Taking advantage of Wind Rider's effects, Shi Feng flew towards the map's core. As Wind Rider only had a duration of 24 seconds, but a cooldown of 2 minutes, Shi Feng was forced to stop every once in a while during his flight. Shi Feng did not have the courage to brave the path on foot. During his 24 seconds in the air, he had spotted at least 3 Lord-ranked monsters. In addition, there were also plenty of chieftains and elites roaming around the snowy forest. Even if he used an isolation scroll, he would not escape detection from so many powerful monsters. After more than an hour of flying and hiding, Shifeng arrived at the base of Mount Sogar's core area. Luckily I can fly. Otherwise I really might not have made it here alive. Shifeng could not help but inwardly celebrate as he looked at the snowy forest at the foot of the mountain. On his way here, aside from lords, Shifeng had even spotted a level 50 Great Lord. With Shifeng's current standards, without flight, he would never escape a Great Lord. After arriving at the foot of the mountain, Shifeng refused to use Wind Rider to fly up the mountain itself. The top of the mountain was flying-type monsters' territory. If he accidentally caught the attention of one of these monsters, he would be in trouble big time. Following which, Shifeng used an isolation scroll and carefully proceeded along the stone steps up the mountain. After arriving at Mount Sogar's heart, the monsters he encountered were level 50 at the very minimum. Shifeng was merely level 32. With such a huge difference in levels, monsters could easily perceive his presence from a long distance away. Although he could reduce his presence with an isolation scroll, if he wanted to avoid detection he would still have to maintain a distance of roughly 80 yards from these monsters. Fortunately, that distance was still well within his range of sight, so he could easily hide. The path up Mount Sogar was very narrow and surrounded by steep cliffs. Not only was it very difficult to hike up the mountain, but there were also groups of stone apes patrolling the path. Unfortunately, there was only a single path up the mountain. Level 50. HP 300, 000/300, 000. By itself, the stone ape was no threat to Shifeng. In fact, he could easily handle 3 or 4 of these elite stone apes simultaneously. However, when a stone ape guard accompanied the group, the situation was largely different. Level 50. HP 2, 800, 000/2, 800, 000. On his way up the mountain, in order to avoid the patrolling stone apes, Shifeng hurriedly hid inside a small cave on the steep hillside. Oh, a secret silver treasure chest. A light shone in Shifeng's eyes. The small cave was only the size of a room. Meanwhile, a tattered treasure chest sat in the deepest part of the cave, giving off a faint silver glow from on top of a thorn and moss-covered stone platform. In God's domain, even common treasure chests were a rare sight, not to mention secret silver-ranked ones. The loot one could obtain from a secret silver treasure chest was much better than even the loot from a lord-ranked boss. He was truly lucky to stumble upon one by accident shortly after arriving at Mount Sogar. However, as a precautionary measure, Shifeng activated omniscient eyes to search for traps inside the cave. In the past, countless players had lost their lives by triggering a trap due to their momentary excitement of discovering a treasure chest. Under the probing of omniscient eyes, Shifeng noticed a magical fluctuation from beside the stone platform. Taking a closer look, he discovered a magic array carved into the cave wall. Only, the thorns and moss covering the wall had obscured the magic array. Fortunately, under the perception of omniscient eyes, these simple obstructions were no different than transparent glass. Sure enough, there's a magical trap. Shifeng laughed as he activated Phantom Kill. He then had his doppelganger stand at the cave's entrance while he ran towards the treasure chest. Chapter 687, Tier 3 Magic Scroll. There were many types of traps in God's domain, and any one of these traps could finish a player off easily. The simplest traps were the ordinary physical traps. Most players could resolve these traps. A slightly more advanced trap was a magical trap. Even experts could lose their lives to these traps if they were not careful. The most advanced traps were challenge traps. When triggered, challenge traps would seal players inside a barrier. Players were then required to undergo a challenge, and only after they cleared the challenge would they obtain the reward. Although challenge traps were the most advanced of the 3 types, the former 2 were the most fatal when triggered. After all, players could simply choose to ignore the treasure if they did not wish to risk their lives, whereas the other 2 types would not offer players such a luxury. Hence, the physical and magical traps claimed the most lives. Meanwhile, classes like the assassin possessed skills to disarm traps. Hence, most solo assassins could get by just finding God's domain. Although Shifeng was a swordsman without any disarm skills, he had magic scrolls that could do the job. This item had a very low drop rate. Moreover, it was only capable of disarming magical traps and challenge traps. Even with 0 wing strength, the guild had only managed to obtain slightly over 20 scrolls. Before coming to Mount Sogar, Shifeng packed 5 of these magic scrolls with him, although he had not expected to use one so soon. Walking up to the stone platform, Shifeng did not hurry to open the treasure chest. Rather, he cleared away the thorns and moss covering the stone platform. He then took out a silvery gray scroll, unfurling it and chanting the incantation recorded within. This silver gray scroll was none other than a Tier 1 disarm scroll. It was capable of disarming all magical and challenge traps of fine gold rank and below treasure chests. However, the precondition was to locate the trap's activation array. Otherwise the scroll would be useless. As the disarm scroll activated, gray smoke seeped into the trap's activation array. The mana within the activation array then began to corrode. Without any mana to power the activation array, the magical trap could no longer be triggered. I wonder what items I will find this time? Shifeng shifted his gaze towards the secret silver treasure chest once more. Exchanging a Tier 1 magic scroll for a secret silver treasure chest was a very profitable trade. Moreover, he was in one of the maps at the top of the world. This area was untouched by players thus far. In other words, the treasure chests throughout the top of the world had yet to be opened even once. Their loot would naturally be somewhat more abundant. This was a similar phenomenon to obtaining the first clear of the dungeon, whereby the end rewards would be slightly buffed. However, Shifeng still did not hurry to open the treasure chest. He first activated Divine Providence. Immediately, his luck increased by an additional 32 points for 30 seconds. Only now did Shifeng open the treasure chest. Following which, a loading bar appeared above the treasure chest, filling gradually. 20 seconds were required to open the secret silver treasure chest. The activation time for this one sure is abnormally long. Shifeng was a little concerned when he saw the required activation time. A treasure chest's activation time usually ranged from 3 to 10 seconds. Even secret silver treasure chests didn't usually require as long as 20 seconds. The seconds ticked by slowly. After the long and arduous 20 seconds, the tattered old treasure chest audibly clicked before its lid gradually opened. In the next moment, an array of colors escaped the treasure chest, illuminating the entire cave. There are so many items inside. After the rainbow brilliance dissipated, the secret silver treasure chest's contents were on full display before Shifeng. Items filled the entire chest. This was definitely the fullest treasure chest Shifeng had ever seen in his life. He spotted more than 10 Tier 3 gemstones alone. There was also a large number of magic crystals and silver coins. There were even 3 weapons and equipment inside the chest. These items were all level 50. Level 50 was considered a major milestone in God's domain. Although part of the reason was that players could apply for their Tier 2 classes at this level, it was mainly due to the difference in equipment. Level 50 equipment was a lot stronger than level 45 equipment. Originally, the attributes on a piece of level 40 secret silver equipment was roughly the equivalent of a piece of level 45 mysterious iron equipment. Only the latter had slightly higher defense. However, the attributes on level 45 secret silver equipment were only the equivalent of level 50 bronze equipment. That was a difference of 2 ranks. Because of this, the attribute gap between players widened significantly. However, after reaching level 50, players would quickly discover that high-quality level 50 weapons and equipment would become far more difficult to obtain. Moreover, the number of weapons and equipment that dropped from dungeons would decrease significantly. Nowadays, ordinary players could collect a full set of bronze equipment so long as they put in the required effort. Many might even have a few pieces of mysterious iron equipment mixed into their sets. However, an ordinary level 50 player walking around in a full set of level 50 bronze equipment would be an impressive feat. Even level 50 mysterious iron equipment would be rarely seen on a guild's normal members. Only elite guild members could barely scrape together a full set of mysterious iron equipment. One could just imagine how difficult it was to obtain level 50 equipment of high quality. Currently, of the 3 pieces of level 50 equipment inside the treasure chest, 2 were secret silver rank and 1 was fine gold rank. He had truly hit the jackpot this time. However, the item that demanded Shifeng's attention was a pale gold scroll. Even though the scroll sat quietly inside the chest, the frightening amount of mana radiated distorted the surrounding mana. If the scroll were activated, who knew what kind of power it could display? This was an effect that only Tier 3 magic scrolls or above could display. Tier 4 magic scrolls were as rare as a phoenix's feather throughout God's domain. If sold, it could fetch for an astronomical price. However, nobody would be so foolish as to actually sell a Tier 4 magic scroll. Meanwhile, although Tier 3 magic scrolls could not compete with Tier 4 magic scrolls in terms of rarity, each scroll was still considered a strategic item to a guild. Outside of an emergency, guilds would never consider using their Tier 3 magic scrolls. I wonder what kind of Tier 3 spell it contains? Shifeng eagerly picked up the pale gold scroll and examined it. Forcibly upgrades the tier of a skill by 1 tier up to a maximum of Tier 3. Cooldown 1 hour. Uses remaining, 30. After reading the introduction, Shifeng was momentarily stunned. A magic amplification scroll was no less valuable than an epic item. To ordinary players, this scroll could forcibly improve their skills by a single tier. This scroll could provide a miraculous impact if used at a critical moment. For example, in a battle between two players who could both use only Tier 1 skills, if the losing player could suddenly amplify one of their skills to Tier 2, it could turn the tide of battle. When fighting bosses, the control effects of a Tier 1 skill was incredibly limited. However, the skill would display a marked difference at Tier 2. And yet, this was still not the magic amplification scroll's greatest function. Its true purpose lay in summoning. It was particularly useful to the summoner class. A Tier 1 summoner could, at most, summon a Tier 1 monster to fight for them. After using magic amplification on their skills, however, they could summon Tier 2 monsters. As for Tier 2 summoners, they could summon Tier 3 monsters. A Tier 3 monster was the equivalent of the Great Lord rank. Whether it was out in the fields, a dungeon, or a PvP battle, having a Great Lord ranked monster by one side would provide massive advantages. One such monster could easily decimate an army of 10,000 players. Although I'm not a summoner, I have the Bible of Darkness. I wonder if the magic amplification scroll will have any effect on it? When Shifeng thought about the possibility of summoning a Tier 3 demon, he could not help but grow excited. If he could summon a Tier 3 demon, he would have a much easier time searching for Solomon's treasure. With the assistance of a Tier 3 demon, he could easily defeat even a group of chieftain-ranked stone ape guards. Chapter 688, Tier 3 Overlord. Setting aside the Tier 3 magic scroll, Shifeng stored the remaining items from the treasure chest in his bag. He then carefully took out the Bible of Darkness. You must succeed. Shifeng was not absolutely confident in being able to summon a Tier 3 demon. After all, the Bible of Darkness was a fragmented legendary item. It was not an easy task to upgrade the skill of a fragmented legendary item. Even with a Tier 3 magic scroll, the likelihood of success was low. Unfurling the magic amplification scroll, Shifeng began to chant its incantation. Suddenly, the mana in the cave went berserk. An endless stream of mana surged into the cave from outside, increasing the density within the cave to the point where it was visible to the naked eye. The dense mana took the form of a multicolored haze that filled the cave, creating a beautiful sight. Such dense mana. Shifeng had become the heart of the cave as mana surged into his body, forming a massive vortex. Emerge Demon Gate. Shifeng activated Demon Summoning. Rumble. Suddenly the cave began to tremble. In the blink of an eye, a massive pair of gates suddenly appeared out of thin air. This gate was twice as large as those that appeared when he summoned Tier 2 demons. Shifeng even struggled to move under the intense pressure this gate emitted. Did I succeed? Shifeng could not help his growing excitement as he watched the demon gate. The combination of the magic amplification scroll and the Bible of Darkness. If he could put this combination to use in a guild war, it would definitely turn the tides of battle. Regardless of the time or location, a Great Lord ranked monster was a massive threat to a player, not to mention a Great Lord that was under an enemy player's control. The threat level of such a Great Lord would be increased by at least tenfold. As the demon gate slowly opened, a humanoid demon wearing crimson scale armor and wielding a pitch-black war axe hovered out of the darkness. However, although the demon had the shape of a human, it was much larger. The demon stood over 3 meters tall and had a pair of blood-red wings that allowed it to hover above the ground. Such a weak little ant actually dares to summon me, the Purgatory Demon? The Purgatory Demon snarled, ridicule flashing its blood-red eyes as it looked down on Shifeng. With a single flap of its wings, the Purgatory Demon crossed the distance of 10 yards in an instant, its speed surpassing even that of a Great Lord. The demon then swung its war axe down towards Shifeng. Die. The pitch-black war axe suddenly emitted intense shockwaves, destabilizing the surrounding space. As the war axe descended, Shifeng suddenly discovered that he could not move. This is the Tier 3 taboo skill, Spatial Suppression. Shifeng was aghast. He had never imagined that the demon he summoned would be so powerful. There were many kinds of Tier 3 demons. Moreover, Tier 3 demons possessed very high intellect, so there was a small number who could learn Tier 3 taboo skills. Among Tier 3 demons, these individuals were warlord-level existences. Shifeng was only a Tier 1 class. He had no hope of breaking free from the suppression of the Tier 3 taboo skill. He could not even use a skill. He could only watch as the massive war axe descended on him. Boom. When the pitch-black war axe landed, the impact destroyed the entire cave. Ah! Such a weakling also dares to use the Bible of Darkness? With this, the Bible of Darkness now belongs to me. The hovering purgatory demon could not help but laugh. However, its laughter was short-lived as a serious expression suddenly appeared on the demon's face, its gaze focused on the ruins before it. Why are you still alive? The purgatory demon stared in shock as it watched Shifeng slowly climb out of the rubble. Shifeng looked somewhat miserable as his entire body was covered in dust. However, his HP was still full. He had not received any damage from the purgatory demon's attack. As expected of a Tier 3 demon. If I hadn't used Phantom Kill as a precaution for the magical trap, that hit really would have killed me, Shifeng said, smiling as he turned to the hovering purgatory demon while dusting himself. The instant the purgatory demon had appeared, Shifeng had noticed that he could not control it completely. Hence, he had immediately activated the Replace skill, trading places with his doppelganger while he hid at the cave's entrance. However, the shockwaves from the demon's Tier 3 taboo skill had still affected him. Fortunately, he was able to activate Defensive Blade in time, blocking the incoming damage. Lucky ant. But you won't be so lucky the next time. The purgatory demon revealed a sinister expression as it swung its massive war axe at Shifeng once more. In response to the fast and destructive attack, Shifeng simply smiled as he said coldly, "There won't be a next time because your time is up." Time? Confusion flashed in the purgatory demon's eyes. Immediately, however, panic appeared on its face as it shifted its gaze towards the Bible of Darkness in Shifeng's hands. Countless blue chains suddenly emerged from the Bible of Darkness. Like a pack of hungry wolves, the chains shot towards the purgatory demon. Defiantly, the demon shouted, "No!" The purgatory demon no longer bothered with its attack on Shifeng. Instead, it was now fled from Shifeng with all its might. However, even if the purgatory demon was fast, it could not outrun the blue chains. The blue chains instantly pierced through the demon and wrapped around its body, sealing its movements completely. It could only whimper and mourn painfully as it lay on the ground. After a few seconds of whining, the purgatory demon's spirited eyes dimmed. As if it had become a walking corpse, the demon slowly stood up from the ground and looked at Shifeng as if waiting for a command. The blue chains binding the demon began to fade. That was close. Luckily I used my doppelganger to buy some time. Shifeng finally released out a sigh of relief as he saw the purgatory demon's lifeless eyes. The Tier 3 demon was finally under his control. It was possible for a summoned creature to rebel. However, the chances of a rebellion were determined by the summoner's strength. Currently, Shifeng was merely a Tier 1 player. If he used a Tier 3 magic scroll to forcefully summon a Tier 3 demon, the chances of a rebellion were quite high. Meanwhile, when a summoned creature rebelled, its first target would be its summoner. Of course, there was also a method to end a rebellion. For example, the Bible of Darkness was capable of eliminating a summoned demon's consciousness. However, time was required to do so. After killing the summoned creature's will, it would become a puppet without any trace of autonomy. This would make it very difficult to control the summoned creature, sharply reducing its combat power. Normally, after a creature was summoned, the summoner only needed to transmit simple commands. The summoned creature would then carry out the commands automatically. However, after becoming a puppet, the summoner would have to split a portion of their consciousness to direct the summoned creature's every movement. This would, in turn, impact the summoner's own combat power. Most importantly, after a summoned creature lost its consciousness, players would face great difficulties when using the monster's skills. When a monster was self-aware, it could achieve 100% of its skill's effects. For players who had never used any of the summoned creature's skills before, in addition to splitting their focus on controlling the monster, it would be a miracle if they exerted 50% of the summoned creature's skills effects. However, Shifeng couldn't care less right now. Compared to a turncoat Tier 3 demon, a puppet Tier 3 demon was far more useful. Although having to control the demon manually would greatly reduce its combat power, it was better than nothing at all. I wasn't able to check its attributes before because it wasn't under my control. I wonder just what kind of attributes the Tier 3 Purgatory Demon possesses? Shifeng was very curious about the Tier 3 demon's attributes. The fact that it could use a Tier 3 taboo skill showed that it was much stronger than ordinary Tier 3 demons. Chapter 689, Astonishing Leveling Speed. So many skills. Upon opening the Purgatory Demon's attribute panel, Shifeng discovered a list of tens of skills. Among them there were 3 Tier 3 skills, one being the Tier 3 taboo skill. The remaining skills were all Tier 2. The Purgatory Demon had more skills than an ordinary player. Moreover, the majority of its skills were AoE skills. The demon could play a huge role in a group battle. In addition, the Purgatory Demon's HP and level were similarly shocking. Purgatory Demon Level 51. HP 13, 000/13, 000/000. Among level 50 Great Lords, its HP might not be considerable, but compared to other Tier 3 demons with high intellect and a large number of skills, the Purgatory Demon's HP was very high. Moreover, an ordinary Tier 3 demon's combat power was generally higher than a Great Lord of the same level. If it came down to a battle, the Tier 3 demon would emerge victorious. Its strength attribute is outrageous. It's several times higher than my strength. It should rival a Grand Lord of the same level. The more Shifeng examined the Purgatory Demon's attributes, the more shocked he became. Currently he was fully equipped with Tier 3 strength-attributed gemstones. He even wore the fragmented legendary ranked Heavenly Dragon's Breath. His strength was no weaker than a chieftain of the same level, yet even if he activated twofold Berserk, his strength would not reach even half of the Purgatory Demon's. With such a powerful summon, his exploration of Mount Sogar's core area would be much easier. At the very least, he would not have to run and hide from monsters constantly. Following which, Shifeng began controlling the Purgatory Demon to venture deeper into the heart of Mount Sogar. There were many groups of stone apes patrolling the trail up Mount Sogar. Not only did each patrol team have over 100 elite stone apes, but the teams were also led by one Lord-ranked stone ape guard. Shortly after exiting the cave, a stone ape guard discovered both Shifeng and the Purgatory Demon. The Lord released a roar and immediately, over 100 level 50 elite stone apes charged at the two intruders. You guys can serve as a test then. Shifeng smiled calmly as he focused the majority of his consciousness into the Purgatory Demon while he hid as far away as possible. However, the Purgatory Demon, which was over 3 meters tall, was like an immovable wall as it stood in the middle of the mountain trail. With its war axe held ready, the demon managed to block the entire trail by itself. When the stone apes arrived before the Purgatory Demon, the latter swept its massive two-handed war axe horizontally across the enemy group. Suddenly, the 6 leading stone apes flew through the air, slamming into the mountainsides bordering the trail. Some of the stone apes' rock bodies shattered when they met the massive war axe, damages of over -30,000 points appearing above their heads. If a player had received the Purgatory Demon's attack just now, they would have died instantly. Such fierce damage. Shifeng was momentarily stunned. He had never imagined that the Purgatory Demon could deal such high damage. Compared to the Snow Lions, the Stone Ape's defense was much higher. Previously, he could deal around -1,200 damage to the Snow Lions with his normal attacks. Yet, the Purgatory Demon dealt over -30,000 damage, destroying over 1/10 of the Stone Ape's HPs with one swing of its axe. Moreover, it even shattered the Stone Ape's rock bodies, wounding the elites heavily and significantly reducing their combat power. In the face of the Purgatory Demon's strength, the Stone Apes were no more than toys. They could not approach Shifeng, who hid behind the Purgatory Demon, at all. However, Shifeng was also struggling to control the Tier 3 demon. Shifeng was already not used moving in the demon's massive body. Attacking only increased the complexity of his task. He could not exert his desired effects at all. At the moment, he was exerting less than 1/3 of the Purgatory Demon's actual strength. Suddenly, the stone ape guard standing behind the group of stone apes jumped into the air and thrust its spear towards the Purgatory Demon. As if it were a venomous snake, the spear left behind 3 afterimages that struck the Tier 3 demon. With the Purgatory Demon's usual standards, it could have dodged the Lord's spear attack effortlessly. However, Shifeng was unable to exert the demon's full strength, so the demon received all 3 attacks. Minus 2,742. Minus 2,802. Minus 2,784. 3 consecutive damages appeared above the Purgatory Demon's head. However, compared to the Purgatory Demon's 13 million HP, these damages were practically negligible. The demon's battle recovery alone regenerated 130,000 HP every 5 seconds. Even if Shifeng allowed the Stone Ape Guard to attack as much as it wished, it would not kill the Purgatory Demon. I wonder how this move will fare. Shifeng did not want to waste any more time with these stone apes. He controlled the Purgatory Demon and activated the Tier 3 skill, Garuda's Flames. Garuda's Flames dealt flame damage within a cone to all enemies within 50 yards. At the same time, targets struck would be forced into a fainted state for 5 seconds. The Purgatory Demon swung its massive war axe and the stone apes before it drowned in a sea of fire. Even while standing behind the Purgatory Demon, Shifeng could feel the scorching heat of Garuda's Flames. Against such a wide-range attack, neither the Stone Ape Guard nor the elite stone apes could avoid it. The Purgatory Demon's attack swallowed every one of the stone apes. Suddenly the 100+ stone apes lost their lives. Only the Lord-ranked Stone Ape Guard still lived. However, the Lord's body glowed bright red with heat, and of its original 2,800,000 HP, only around 2,100,000 remained. Garuda's Flames dealt nearly 700,000 damage to a level 50 Lord. Meanwhile, Shifeng had exerted less than 50% of the skill's effect. If the Purgatory Demon were still self-aware, Garuda's Flames would probably have devoured over half of the Stone Ape Guard's HP. It's a pity that this skill's cooldown is somewhat long. Otherwise, grinding with this skill would be exhilarating. Shifeng sighed as he glanced at his experience bar. Shifeng had been at 9% of level 32. Now his experience stopped at 20%. His experience bar had jumped by a full 11%. After players reached level 30, the amount of EXP they required to level up would increase tremendously. Even expert players had to grind for several days to gain a single level, not to mention someone like Shifeng, who required twice as much EXP as ordinary players. Any other player would have gained 22%. They would only have to defeat 5 Stone Ape Patrol teams to gain a level. However, part of this was also because the monsters at the top of the world provided much higher EXP than the monsters in Starmoon Kingdom. Moreover, there was also the fact that the Stone Apes were elite monsters and were 18 levels higher than Shifeng, providing him with ample amounts of bonus EXP. For an ordinary player, a common monster that was 2 or 3 levels higher would be their limit, let alone an elite monster. Normally, a party of ordinary players was required to take down a single elite monster. After splitting the EXP 6 ways, each player would only receive a small amount. Meanwhile, Shifeng enjoyed the EXP from more than 100 stone apes by himself. His leveling speed would be as fast as flight. Following which, Shifeng directed the Purgatory Demon to attack the Stone Ape Guard with more skills. The Tier 3 skills cooldowns were simply too long. Shifeng intended to use them sparingly, so he only used Tier 2 skills to deal with the Stone Ape Guard. Even so, each Tier 2 skill dealt over minus 100,000 damage. In less than 30 seconds, the Stone Ape Guard lay at the Purgatory Demon's feet. Meanwhile, Shifeng's experience bar had risen by an additional 6%. The Lord provided more EXP than half of the 100+ elite Stone Apes. Other than providing Shifeng with an abundance of EXP, these stone apes had also dropped a large number of items. Equipment and materials littered the mountain trail before the Purgatory Demon. The drop rate here was even better than in the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, this place was home to monsters that were level 50 and above. If Shifeng grinded in an ordinary high-level map in Starmoon Kingdom rather than at the top of the world, he would not enjoy such a lucrative drop rate. However, Mount Sogar possessed a large number of powerful monsters. This was one major difference between it and ordinary maps. Surviving here was already extremely difficult for level 50 players, not to mention grinding for levels and items. Moreover, Shifeng was only able to eliminate the powerful monsters here due to the Purgatory Demon. Chapter 690 Absurd EXP. The top of the world is pretty nice. It's no wonder why those experts in the past tried so hard to come here. Shifeng sighed contentedly after he finished organizing the loot. Among these drops, There were several dozen pieces of level 50 equipment, 2 of which were mysterious iron rank, 16 were bronze rank, and the remainder were common rank. After reaching level 50, even elite monsters rarely dropped bronze equipment. Only chieftains would drop bronze equipment with a 100% certainty and had the chance to drop mysterious iron equipment. As a result, players would have a far more difficult time obtaining level 50 high-quality equipment. To make matters worse, the final bosses of level 50 hard mode party dungeons were only chieftains. Only hell mode had lord-ranked final bosses. However, how many ordinary parties were capable of conquering hell mode party dungeons? Moreover, bosses' drop rates declined sharply after level 50. A boss that would drop 6 or 7 items at lower levels would only drop 1 or 2 items after reaching level 50. Shifeng could vaguely remember the time he had fought and grinded frantically, only managing to reach level 50 after an arduous struggle. Yet, what about level 50 equipment? After investing a ton of effort, he had only managed to obtain a full set of level 50 mysterious iron equipment by the time he reached level 50. If he had worn that quality equipment when he was level 45, he would have been considered as an ordinary veteran player at best. Even so, he had been the envy of Blackie and many of his fellow guild members. Back then, wearing several pieces of level 50 mysterious iron equipment into a 20-man team dungeon had been a luxury, not to mention a full set of mysterious iron equipment. After all, one obtained less than a handful of level 50 mysterious iron items after clearing a level 50, 20-man hard mode team dungeon. This was also the reason behind Forger's suddenly popularity surge. Although it might be very difficult for players to forge top-tier equipment, they had a relatively high success rate for producing level 50 and above bronze and mysterious iron weapons and equipment. However, the required materials were not so easily obtained. On the other hand, after defeating a single wave of stone apes, Shifeng now had so many pieces of level 50 bronze and mysterious iron equipment. It was mind-blowing. Shifeng continued to explore Mount Sogar's core area. During his journey, he defeated any stone ape patrols that he encountered for EXP and equipment. Humans had yet to claim Mount Sogar, so there were many stone ape patrols wandering along the mountain trail. It did not take long before Shifeng encountered another patrol team. For Shifeng, this place was a leveling heaven. Against the stone ape patrols, the purgatory demon's strength was simply overwhelming. In less than 3 hours, Shifeng easily reached 74% of level 33. If he wanted to, he could place in the top 20 of Star Moon Kingdom's ranking list. Previously, to obtain the first clear of level 30, 100-man team dungeons, the various guilds had intentionally held back their levels. Meanwhile, some powerful independent experts or workshop experts had not. Instead, they took the opportunity to level up rapidly, earning some fame for themselves. Hence, the current average level on Star Moon Kingdom's ranking list was quite high, with the top 3 players at level 34. Meanwhile, the top 20 on Star Moon Kingdom's ranking list were all level 33 and above. If not for the Purgatory Demon helping him grind on Mount Sogar, he might have struggled to catch up to the top 20 players. Mount Sogar was massive. It was almost 3 times as large as an ordinary leveling map of the same level. Hence, searching for Solomon's treasure was time-consuming. Shifeng also encountered many powerful monsters throughout his journey, which slowed his progress further. To explore Mount Sogar effectively, Shifeng had used the Bible of Darkness and Magic Amplification Scroll once more to summon a level 51 Tier 3 Cursed Demon. Although the Cursed Demon had similarly turned on him, Shifeng had directed the Purgatory Demon to incapacitate the Cursed Demon, allowing him to force it into submission. Unlike the Purgatory Demon, however, the Cursed Demon did not possess any Tier 3 taboo skills. It also only had 9,500,000 HP. However, as it was a magic-type demon, its AoE capabilities were much stronger than the Purgatory Demon. With 2 Tier 3 demons under his control, Shifeng could explore the area far more efficiently. He had no problems facing even 2 or 3 waves of stone ape patrols simultaneously. He no longer had to waste too much time hiding and killing monsters. The Stoneclaw Mountains Inner Region. Kola, be careful of that half-orc lord's skills. Lure it away from the team first. Everyone else, focus fire on the lord that Turtledove is tanking. Fire Dance fought while commanding her team to deal with 2 level 40 half-orc lords. Currently, players crowded the Stoneclaw Mountains. To secure more resources for themselves, Zero Wing's main force had no choice but to distance themselves from the crowd and push deeper into the mountains. They were lucky if they encountered a lord in the outer region. However, after reaching the inner region, the number of lords wandering about had increased significantly. From time to time, players would have to face two lords simultaneously. This was a huge challenge for teams. Hence, the various guild teams avoided this area. To Zero Wing's main force, however, this area was just difficult enough. Zero Wing's lead MT Cola wore a complete Tier 1 set equipment. He also had the blue fire shield. He had no problems handling a single level 40 lord by himself. As for Turtledove, she had recently obtained the epic rank Divine Frost armor, so she too could tank a lord without assistance. In addition, Yi Wumian similarly wore a complete Tier 1 set equipment for shield warriors. He was constantly ready to jump in when necessary. If the MTs had no issues, there was no need to mention the team's DPS. Whether it was Fire Dance, Rampant Blade, Shadow Sword, Minor Wind, or Violet Cloud, every one of them possessed superb attack power. They also wore equipment that allowed them to ignore more than 10 of monsters' levels. Without any level suppression, their damage against level 40 lords would not be affected in the slightest. Hence, the team was more than capable of taking down two level 40 lords simultaneously. Currently, the members of Zero Wing's main force were all at level 32, leveling with impressive speed. There were a few reasons for their leveling rate. First, everyone's experience bars had been frozen around 90% of level 30 throughout their raid of the Frost Prison. After obtaining the first clear of the Hell Mode Frost Prison, everyone promptly turned their attention to grinding in the Stoneclaw Mountains. They also managed to accumulate the double EXP buff by resting in the guild residence's private rooms while they had been offline. While they had focused on raiding the Frost Prison, they had accumulated more than one level's worth of the double EXP buff. Thus, the moment they returned to leveling, they rapidly climbed to level 32. In less than 20 minutes, the team had dealt with their latest half-orc enemies, resulting in everyone's experience bars rising significantly. Fire Dance, our guild members have been ambushed in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Be careful. Aqua Rose suddenly contacted Fire Dance to warn her. Someone's ambushed our guild members? Fire Dance was slightly surprised. Which guild is it? Stone Forest Town was Zero Wing's territory now. For someone to dare target Zero Wing's members in the Stoneclaw Mountains, they were simply asking to be banned from the town. I don't think that it's a guild. The ambushed members reported that their attackers had not worn any guild emblems. After watching the videos they recorded, the ambushers didn't seem like any guild experts I've encountered. However, the enemy is moving in relatively large groups. The smaller groups have around a dozen or so players, while the largest one is a 50-man team. I've researched that team already. They do not belong to any guild. Rather, the team belongs to a workshop. Aqua Rose was similarly surprised when she received the report on these assailants. After all, every player currently grinding in the Stoneclaw Mountains should know Zero Wing's reputation. Yet there were still people who dared to ambush their members. In any case, your team should be on the lookout as well. I'll try to learn more as soon as possible. If this really were the doing of a guild, then she would destroy that guild's foothold in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Alright, I'll make a note of it. Fire Dance nodded. There would not be any other players in the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region. After all, the danger here was much higher than in the outer areas. Ordinary players could not set foot here and survive. However, as soon as Fire Dance disconnected the call, she heard Minor Wind's anxious voice through the team chat. A large group of players is approaching. Chapter 691, Red List. In God's domain, not only did Rangers possess both melee and ranged combat capabilities, but their perception and scouting abilities were also superior to other classes. Particularly, out in the dangerous fields, if a party had a Ranger among its members, the party could avoid many potential dangers. As the number 1 Ranger of Zero Wing, not only did Minor Wind wear excellent equipment, but he had also learned some rare skills thanks to Shurfeng's guidance, particularly scouting and perception skills. Some of these skills could strengthen a player's 5 senses, even allowing them to see a blade of grass that was over 100 yards away. If they could detect a powerful monster approaching, they could avoid unnecessary battles. As a ranger expert, Minor Wind could reach even greater heights with these skills. If an enemy did not possess skills like the assassin's stealth, Minor Wind would easily discover them as they shifted through the grass, even from 150 yards away. Are they guild players? Fire Dance asked. This was the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region. Not only were the monsters very high-leveled, but they were also much stronger than ordinary monsters of the same level. Generally, only large guilds' main forces were capable of grinding here. No. None of them are wearing any guild emblems. Moreover, they all are red names, Minor Wind reported and shook his head after observing them carefully with eagle eyes. Based on how they're moving, it is clear that they are coming straight for us. They're charging at us? Kola could not help but laugh. Do these red names think that we are easy targets? The others also began laughing. With their team skills and equipment, even an army of 1,000 elite players would not be a problem, much less a small team. Other players should celebrate their peaceful coexistence. Yet, now, an unknown group of players intentionally sought them out to cause trouble. These people did not understand the difference between life and death. Alright, enough. Everyone get ready, Fire Dance commanded. She felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. She then directed a question to Minor Wind, asking, roughly how many of them are there? There should be around 300 people. Among them, there's one person I've seen before. He's an expert ranked on Starmoon Kingdom's red list. Minor Wind could not help his surprise after he could observe more details about the approaching enemies. The main god system had not comprised nor did it handle the red list. Rather, players had established it to keep a record of powerful red names. Starmoon Kingdom's red list only kept a record of the top 100 red names in the kingdom. Every one of these red names was an expert. Among these red list experts, there were even a few that guilds would not casually provoke. Fortunately, however, these experts also avoided provoking the various large guilds. Hence, the relationship between them had always been relatively peaceful, each minding their own businesses. Yet, now, an expert on the red list had actually come to challenge them. This was certainly unexpected. Since they want to target Zero Wing, make sure their visit is a one-way trip. Fire Dance glowered. She felt there was more to this than what appeared on the surface. Although she did not know what it was, dealing with the approaching red names took priority over all else. Immediately, Fire Dance led the team to welcome their aggressors. Big Brother Traceless Blood, it seems that we've been discovered, a sharp-faced male ranger in tight gray leather clothes hurriedly reported to the male assassin beside him. This assassin had eyes like a venomous snake, and he hid his face behind a black scarf. Although this male assassin had a thin body, among the nearly 300 red names present, not a single person dared to underestimate him. It was because this man was an expert ranked within the top 10 of Starmoon Kingdom's red list. Although there was more than one red list expert among the crowd, none of them could even hope to hold a candle to Traceless Blood. After all, Traceless Blood had once massacred a third-rate guild's main force. Moreover, even though said third-rate guild had attempted to corner Traceless Blood many times, they had never once successfully killed him. On the contrary, the assassin had claimed their guild leader's life multiple times. For a time, that guild had been a laughingstock. From that moment on, no guild out there dared to underestimate Traceless Blood. Aside from guilds, Traceless Blood had also killed many of Starmoon Kingdom's experts. His most notable assassination attempt so far was his assassination of the Star Alliance's guild leader, Galaxy Past. In the end, although he had failed to kill Galaxy Past, he had escaped the Star Alliance's many experts. This outcome had angered Galaxy Past greatly, and the man had even ordered a bounty on Traceless Blood, rewarding 50 gold each time someone manages to kill him. If converted to credits, 50 gold was the equivalent of more than 100,000 credits. This was sufficient to tempt many people. Unfortunately, until this day, not a single person had managed to kill Traceless Blood even once. On the contrary, Galaxy Past's bounty had only served to boost the assassin's fame, becoming an infamous red name on Starmoon Kingdom's bounty list. Good then. I've wanted to experience the skills of Zero Wing's experts for a while now. You guys should be careful. Although we have the numerical advantage, our coordination is definitely no match for theirs. Try to split their members up as much as possible, Traceless Blood commanded. He then activated stealth and vanished before the crowd. Everyone nodded in response. In truth, however, they all looked down on Zero Wing. They were all PvP experts. Hundreds, if not thousands, of players had died at each of these red names' hands. Particularly in field battles, the various large guilds' experts were no different from pampered flowers. These experts mainly focused on raiding dungeons. When it came to PvP in the fields, such experts were nothing to them. I heard that the equipment of Zero Wing's main force is superb. We're going to make a fortune. Many red names drooled when thinking about Zero Wing's equipment. Someone's charging towards us, a red name ranger shouted. Immediately, every red name went on alert, focused on the group of players charging towards them. Haha. Sure enough, they're just a bunch of noobs that don't know what a real battle is. Rather than attacking from a distance first, they've decided to jump into their graves. Many of the ranged red names began to launch attacks at Zero Wing's 3 MTs. These three were none other than Kola, Yiwumian, and Turtledove. Facing more than 100 ranged attacks, the 3 MTs immediately utilized the trees as cover, avoiding the oncoming attacks while advancing. Even when an attack landed, they only received a few hundred damage. All 3 MTs had over 10,000 HP, so this damage was barely a scratch. A single heal from the rear line healers was all they needed to recover. Such high defense and HP. However, do you really think you can win by relying on your equipment? A few melee red names could not help but curse disdainfully as they watched the 3 MTs. They then readied their weapons and charged to meet Zero Wing in battle. Equipment was only one of the many aspects of battle. Even if their HPs and defenses were higher, they could not live if they could not move. Suddenly, dozens of melee players surrounded the 3 MTs, halting their advance. Knowing that Kola and the others had superior equipment, these red names did not take them head-on. Instead, they used skills to restrict the trio, creating opportunities for the ranged players to chip away their HPs. Turtledove was only a guardian knight. Even if her dodging capabilities were more powerful against more than a dozen players, she was bound to be hit sooner or later. Red name's normal attacks usually dealt around -400 damage to her. If a powerful skill stuck her, she would receive more than -1000 damage. She would not last long even if she cast Protection Blessing on herself. I can finally test out this move. Turtledove smiled calmly as she activated Freezing Air. Chapter 692, A Corporation's Strength. Starmoon City, Starmoon Restaurant. Starmoon Restaurant was the only 5-star restaurant in Starmoon City. The building was 36 stories tall and stood at the heart of the city's central trade district. If one dined in the top-floor rooms of the restaurant, they could couple their food with the beauty of Starmoon City. However, even expert players could not afford even a single meal in the top-floor rooms. The minimum expenditure here was 30 gold. Normally, only NPC nobles came here for a meal. This was not a place for players. Today, however, a charming and sexy female player in luxurious purple robes enjoyed a meal in one of the VIP rooms on the top floor. Delicacies covered the table, each costing at least 2 gold. Each dish offered players a relatively top-tier piece of equipment. Suddenly, the room's doors opened. A burly, middle-aged man entered the room. "Miss Willow, I've arranged for the matter you requested. Both the red names and various workshops are quite satisfied with the remuneration that we have provided. Now, all we need to do is watch as Zero Wing is slowly ground to dust," the burly man reported coldly as he approached the purple-robed female respectfully. This man was none other than Twilight Echo's guild leader, Glorious Echo. After Sher Feng had angered Exemplary Willow, the latter had ordered Glorious Echo to deal with Zero Wing. However, that was a challenge even for him. Starmoon Kingdom was not Twilight Echo's home ground. Moreover, even if it were, Twilight Echo couldn't do anything about Stone Forest Town. Hence, he had decided to hire the various workshops and red names in Starmoon Kingdom to deal with Zero Wing. A beggar doesn't fear going bankrupt. Unlike guilds, these players could afford to target Zero Wing as they had never particularly relied on Stone Forest Town or the Stoneclaw Mountains to strengthen themselves and level up. Even if Zero Wing tried to avenge their losses, locating these red names and workshops would not be easy. The resources and manpower required to do so would gradually wear Zero Wing down. It was especially true for those red names. Every one of them was an expert in field combat. It was easy for these red names to find an opportunity to kill a few of Zero Wing's core members. In addition, through repeated ambushes and harassment, they could restrict Zero Wing's activity. Moreover, Exemplary Willow was still arranging further punishment for Zero Wing. There was no need to worry about the guild surviving. "What did the Star Alliance and Ouroboros say about our offer?" Exemplary Willow asked softly. "The Star Alliance has agreed to our conditions. Ouroboros, unfortunately, does not know how to appreciate kindness when offered. However, I've contacted Ouroboros' original guild leader. If Miss Willow agrees to help him, he is confident that he can reclaim Ouroboros for himself." Glorious Echo had been shocked by Gentle Snow's rejection. Ouroboros was no longer as strong as it had been. After the mutiny, Ouroboros began to struggle. Several corporations that had originally supported Ouroboros had abandoned the guild. The fact that the guild remained standing was a miracle in and of itself. Theoretically, the guild should be in need of a large sum of money to turn things around. Yet, Gentle Snow had rejected the offer of Open Source Corporation's support. Exemplary Willow had offered no less than what she had given Twilight Echo. Moreover, as the guild leader of Ouroboros, Gentle Snow should hold a significant fraction of the guild's shares. If she had accepted the offer, those shares would have easily become over 10 times more valuable. Exemplary Willow wanted to obtain the Stoneclaw Mountains at all cost. If they could not obtain Starmoon City's 2 first-rate guilds, it would be nearly impossible to claim the regional dungeon for themselves. Hence, Glorious Echo had sought out Ouroboros' original guild leader, Chao Qinghua. Chao Qinghua's influence was still entwined with Ouroboros. He was only helpless about his situation because Gentle Snow had gained the support of several important guild elders. If Chao Qinghua had the support of OSC, however, there was a large possibility that he could regain control over Ouroboros. Since that is the case, agree to his conditions. I don't want to waste too much of my time on Starmoon Kingdom. Exemplary Willow nodded indifferently. When she thought about Shifeng's previous arrogance, her lips unconsciously twisted into a cold sneer. Against a boorish fellow like Shifeng, she had decided to show him just what kind of beast he had provoked. Meanwhile, in the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region, the battle between Zero Wing's main force and the army of Red Names was in full swing. After Turtledove activated Freezing Air, the temperature within 15 yards of her fell sharply, cold air filling the area. The movement speeds of the dozen or so Red Names surrounding Turtledove instantly dropped by 40%. Meanwhile, the damage Turtledove received decreased to around -100 points. These Red Names were no fools. The moment they noticed the change to their movement speeds, they began to distance themselves from Turtledove. In the next second, however, their movement speeds decreased by another 40%. Even if they fast, they could not outrun the Guardian Knight. 3 seconds later, all of the melee Red Names surrounding Turtledove and the other 2 MTs were frozen. What kind of skill is this? Some of the melee players who had intended to charge at Turtledove slid to a halt, aghast as they watched their companions turn into ice sculptures. With such an AoE control skill and high defense, melee classes like themselves had no hope in close combat with Turtledove. They could only allow Turtledove move unhindered as she approached their team's rear line healers. However, as players who often participated in PvP battles, these Red Names were no weaklings. Every one of them possessed skills that allowed them to remove control effects. They immediately activated these skills to break free from their restraints. If they were frozen solid, they would be no more than practice targets. Zero Wing's ranged players would bombard them with vicious attacks. If comparing equipment quality, Zero Wing's main force was at least 2 levels above theirs. It was especially true for Minor Wind's attacks. As he possessed the Tier 1 weapon, Windchaser, even MTs such as Shield Warriors and Guardian Knights, who possessed damage reduction skills, received over -1000 from each of his normal attacks. If they sustained one of the Ranger's skills, they would receive nearly -3000 damage, nearly -6000 damage if it were a critical hit. Among these Red Name MTs, there were a few who had as much as 9000 HP, while some had as little as 8000 HP. A single critical hit from a skill was more than enough to destroy over half of their HPs. Even the Red Name healers could not keep up with Minor Wind's damage. Moreover, Minor Wind's attack speed was astonishing. Even expert players would have a hard time dodging his arrows. Furthermore, these Red Names had opponents in front of them to deal with. They could not afford to split their attention to dodging the Ranger's arrows. Only as soon as these players broke free from their frozen debuffs, they instantly discovered that something was amiss. Although they were no longer frozen, their movement speeds were still so low. They could not shake off Turtledove and could only suffer the Guardian Knight's repeated attacks. Each of Turtledove's attacks dealt over -600 damage to the melee players. Using Hammer of Sanctions, not only could she force her target into a fainted state, but she could also achieve a critical hit of over -3000 points. The half HP level 31 Shield Warrior, who was Turtledove's current target, lost his remaining HP instantly, dropping 2 pieces of equipment as he fell to the ground. These Red Names all belonged to the forces of darkness. Even the penalty they received for being Red Names were light. They only lost slightly more EXP than the average player, roughly 1.5 to 2 levels worth of EXP. Meanwhile, Kola's and Yi Wumian's damage was even higher than Turtledove's. Each one of their skills dealt over -4000 damage with a critical hit. The unlucky half HP melee Red Names died instantly. Damn it. Why is their damage so high? Many red names were dumbfounded. What these red names did not know, however, was that Kola and the others' skill completion rates far surpassed theirs. Hence, their skill damage was very high. 3 seconds later, the melee players who had broken free from the freezing effect froze solid once more. Against the ranged attacks of Zero Wing's main force, even with their healer's support, these red names could not escape death. In the blink of an eye, over a dozen melee red names fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the majority of Zero Wing's melee forces suddenly emerged from the forest, launching a pincer attack from the side. As the red names had focused all of their attention on the 3 MTs, they were momentarily caught off guard by the sudden pincer attack. Just as the melee red names tried desperately to defend against the sudden ambush, Fire Dance, Flying Shadow, and the other assassins of Zero Wing suddenly appeared behind the red name healers. Ambush, Backstab, Absolute Strike. With a chain of attacks, Fire Dance and the other assassins claimed the lives of multiple healers. Meanwhile, the red name assassins had similar thoughts. They had long since circled to Zero Wing's back, launching an ambush on the team's healers. Die. Traceless Blood had long since set his eyes on the cleric Violet Cloud. Using shadow steps, he appeared right behind Violet Cloud, his dagger plunging towards Violet Cloud's heart. Chapter 693, Magic Weapon Against Magic Weapon. Traceless Blood was extremely fast. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The assassin had not given Violet Cloud any opportunities to activate her skills. Traceless Blood had investigated Violet Cloud, so he knew the cleric was very strong. If he gave her even a breath of time, it was possible that his assassination attempt would fail. Hence, he had taken his time, slowly and carefully approaching Violet Cloud and using shadow steps at its maximum range. This way, by the time Violet Cloud's senses reacted, it would be too late. The dagger covered in engraved, black runes tore through the air, colliding with Violet Cloud's back. With his first strike landing successfully, Traceless Blood immediately used the most powerful skill of assassins, Absolute Strike, instead of a different skill like Backstab. Unlike Backstab, Absolute Strike did not require any specific attack motions, allowing for a faster strike. Suddenly, Traceless Blood transformed into a black light that pierced through Violet Cloud. After arriving in front of the cleric, Traceless Blood spun in midair, using his dagger's most powerful additional skill, Flowing Light, on the cleric. Flowing Light's single target damage was even higher than Absolute Strike. The skill was also much faster, the entire process ending in less than a heartbeat. You. Traceless Blood's eyes widened as he looked at his dagger in disbelief. No matter how much strength he put into his arm, his dagger could not pierce Violet Cloud's pale golden robes. It was as if her robes were made of adamantine. You are quite impressive. If I hadn't activated Absolute Space at the first sign of danger, I would have most likely been dead by now, Violet Cloud said as she looked at the dagger with black runes. Those black runes looked very familiar to her. They were very similar to the runes unique to magic weapons. If the dagger wounded her, the consequences would be unimaginable. Since his attack had failed, although Traceless Blood was shocked, he immediately turned and fled. He abandoned the idea of attacking Violet Cloud as he knew that he could no longer inflict damage on the cleric. Moreover, he did not know the duration of the cleric's Absolute Space. While she had that protection, he was no more than a living target. His only options were to run and hide. You can't escape. Violet Cloud did not dare give Traceless Blood an opportunity to escape. Absolute Space had a relatively long cooldown. If she allowed the assassin to get away, she would not be able to fend him off should he come back to attack her again. Waving her finger, she used the Tier 1 skill, Star's Guidance. Immediately, a powerful gravitational force pulled at Traceless Blood, dragging him back towards Violet Cloud. What kind of skill is this? This was the first time Traceless Blood had seen such an unconventional skill. He felt like small threads had wrapped around him, zealously pulling him towards his enemy. As a last resort, Traceless Blood used his control removal skill, removing the effects of Star's Guidance. Sacred Seal. Seeing that her attack had failed, Violet Cloud used Sacred Seal, a marking skill of clerics. Suddenly, a sacred light appeared on Traceless Blood's forehead, preventing him from entering stealth. Damn it! She knows a skill like this as well? Traceless Blood began to panic. Not being able to enter stealth was extremely disadvantageous for him. With this, he would not be able to sneak up on Violet Cloud later in the battle. Shortly after Traceless Blood began to flee, a black figure dashed towards him. Don't even think of escaping. Shadow Sword lifted Tempest's breath and used charge at the assassin. Since Traceless Blood had already used his control removal skill, he had no choice but to use wind steps, utilizing the 1 second of invulnerability the skill provided to block Shadow Sword's charge. Turning around, Traceless Blood then flipped his dagger into a reverse grip and plunged the weapon into Shadow Sword's abdomen. Kidney strike. As long as the skill forced the berserker into a fainted state for 2 or 3 seconds, it would be enough for him to get away. Realizing that he could not block the incoming attack in time, Shadow Sword activated Whirlwind Slash, swinging Tempest's breath at Traceless Blood. Shadow Sword fully intended to trade hit for hit. Seeing this, Traceless Blood had no choice but to halt his attack and retreat immediately, evading Shadow Sword's Whirlwind Slash. He was merely an assassin. How could his normal attacks deal more damage than a berserker? Moreover, he wore leather armor, whereas berserkers wore plate armor. Even if his weapon were a magic weapon, a head-on clash could end with mutual destruction. Moreover, he currently occupied the rear line of the enemy's formation. There were no healers to recover his HP. However, Shadow Sword was different. He had the assistance of a healer like Violet Cloud. The berserker had no fear of a battle of attrition. Hence, when Shadow Sword attacked, there was no fear in his eyes at all. After evading Shadow Sword's attack, Traceless Blood immediately turned and fled, having no desire to continue his clash with the berserker. His opponents included an expert cleric and an expert berserker. He had very little confidence in defeating either one in a frontal assault, to begin with, not to mention fighting both simultaneously. However, Shadow Sword had no intentions of letting the assassin get away so easily. Immediately he followed his failed attack with Break and Thunderclap. When the movement speed reduction effects of both skills were compounded, Traceless Blood lost any hope of escaping the berserker. Traceless Blood had no choice but to enter a melee with Shadow Sword. Pum. When the two weapons collided, dazzling sparks scattered into the surroundings. The impact forced Traceless Blood to retreat by 3 steps, a grim expression appearing on his face when he noticed his opponent still standing steadily in his original location. Why does he have so much strength? Traceless Blood acknowledged that his own strength attribute was quite high, even slightly higher than an ordinary berserker. Yet, against Shadow Sword's attack, this berserker's strength overwhelmed him. The magic weapon he wielded granted him a significant amount of strength. Even if Shadow Sword was superior in terms of strength, the berserker's attack should not have been able to force him back by 3 steps. Even now, his hands still felt numb from the exchange. Zero Wing actually possesses so many top-tier experts. Smiling, Violet Cloud finished chanting her incantation. She then pointed her finger at Traceless Blood. Tier 1 spell Black Coffin. A pitch-black barrier suddenly wrapped around Traceless Blood. Having no other choice, Traceless Blood used Vanish. After activating Vanish, he would become invulnerable to all attacks momentarily. The skill would also place him in a forced invisibility state for 3 seconds, followed by a stealth state. Even Sacred Seal would not be effective during forced invisibility's 3 seconds, and these 3 seconds were more than enough to put a huge distance between himself and the two experts. Vanish. Shadow Sword had no counter for this skill either. This was the most powerful life-saving skill an assassin, one of the 12 major classes, possessed. Unless one had a silencing skill, it was extremely difficult to kill an expert assassin. 3 seconds later, Traceless Blood reappeared far from Shadow Sword. At this range, even the berserker's charge would not reach him. Moreover, assassin was an agility-focused class. In terms of movement speed, an assassin was much faster than a berserker. In addition, Traceless Blood also possessed equipment that enhanced his speed. There was no way that Shadow Sword could catch up to him at this point. This was also why Traceless Blood had been able to escape after his assassination attempt on Galaxy Past had failed. What's this? Traceless Blood suddenly noticed a black magic array beneath his feet. Although Traceless Blood struggled to get away, this black magic array was like a black hole. No matter how much he tried to struggle, he could not escape his fate of being devoured. In the next moment, the black magic array swallowed the assassin whole, his body vanishing without a trace. When Traceless Blood saw light again, he was shocked. How is this possible? He appeared a short distance from Violet Cloud once more. This time, however, he was surrounded by mana balls and barriers of light. The berserker Shadow Sword also stood nearby. He had no options to flee the enclosement of the barriers of light. I already told you that you can't escape. Wielding a pitch-black key in her hand, Violet Cloud smiled at Traceless Blood and said calmly, "You have a magic weapon. I too have a magic weapon." To resolve a serious threat like Traceless Blood, Violet Cloud utilized her final trump card, Star's Reminiscence. The skill was also an Astromancer's main weapon. One of the skill's effects was spatial imprisonment. When activated, Star's Reminiscence would lock a target in the specified space indefinitely. If the target wished to escape their imprisonment, their only option was to shatter the spatial barrier or have the user dispel the skill. Meanwhile, the user's mana determined how much damage the spatial barrier could absorb. It was a skill with terrifying effects. However, the skill also had a very long cooldown of 2 hours. I'm actually going to die like this. Traceless Blood could not help but smile bitterly as he watched the mana balls that covered the sky and the berserker that eyed him like a fierce tiger. Chapter 694 Zero Wing Strength. Stoneclaw Mountains Outer Region. Currently, over 400 finely equipped red names push deeper into the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region. However, as they approached the area, not only were the monsters they encountered stronger, but the number of monsters they encountered also increased. Moreover, the more players there were on the team, the easier it was for monsters to discover them. As a result, battles occurred quite frequently. Initially, the group only encountered 200 to 300 level 35 elite half-orcs and a few special elite and chieftain half-orcs. Now, however, the group frequently encountered groups of 400 to 500 level 38 elite half-orcs led by level 39 half-orc lords. The battles were twice as difficult now. Our luck is terrible. These half-orcs respawn so quickly. If we had known that their respawn rates were so fast, we would not have wasted so much time on recruiting more members and let Traceless Blood get ahead of us. Many team members envied Traceless Blood's team. To have better chances of defeating Zero Wing's main force, they had spent a lot of time trying to recruit more members. Yet now they had to deal with all of these half-orcs. It would still be some time before they would catch up with Zero Wing's main force. I heard that the battle has started already. I wonder if we can make it in time? We'd be more effective if we arrived late. After all, this is Zero Wing's main force we are talking about. If Traceless Blood cannot wipe them out completely, we can pick up the scraps. Hey, that's Traceless Blood you're talking about. With him on the offensive, do you really think many will get away? I guess that's true. Let's hurry then. Otherwise, this trip will have been pointless. Realizing this, the team began to fight with more fervor. In God's domain, dark players and light players rarely interacted as both sides looked down on each other. To dark players, light players were merely a group of players with little to no combat capabilities. They were only good at grinding dungeons. How could such players compare to their intense lifestyles of blood and blades? Hence, no matter how famous and powerful a guild expert was, in the eyes of red names, these experts were insignificant existences. Red names thought nothing of light guilds. There's a large group of players heading our way, a ranger suddenly reported. It can't be Zero Wing's main force, right? I didn't think that they would give up so quickly. It seems that Zero Wing only amounts to so much. Those rumors about how powerful the guild is are all just a bunch of lies. Many red names began to ridicule and mock the guild. Alright, enough. Get ready. Do not let a single player from Zero Wing escape. They were quickly approaching the Stoneclaw Mountains inner region. Aside from Zero Wing and the ambushing red names, this area was empty of players. Since these players approached them from the inner region, they were, without a doubt, members of Zero Wing. Immediately, the 400-plus red names spread out and waited for Zero Wing to stumble right into their encirclement. Seconds ticked by. Very quickly, several dozen players emerged from the forest, each and every one of them looking miserable. These players panted heavily as they emerged. It was obvious that they had exhausted their stamina from running across a long distance. Just as the red names, who lay in wait, were about to rush forward and surround these exhausted players, they suddenly realized that something was amiss. Isn't that Berserker 3 Knives, the person ranking 91st on the red list? Aren't they members of Traceless Blood's team? Why do they look so miserable? A series of questions popped up in everyone's minds. However, they soon found their answers. Suddenly, dozens of arrows and spells burst from the forest. In the blink of an eye, several of the escaping red names fell to the ground and dropped several pieces of their equipment. Meanwhile, Three Knives, who ran at the forefront of the team, desperately blocked and dodged the incoming attacks. However, 2 arrows still found him, his HP instantly falling by nearly 3,000. You think you can get away with provoking Zero Wing? Minor Wind, who appeared at the treeline, coldly demanded as he glared at Three Knives. Behind him, more of Zero Wing's members followed. Since I can't escape, I'll take you to the grave with me. Three Knives, who was exhausted from running, stopped as he resolved to fight to the death. The fight with Zero Wing's main force had been one-sided punishment. Even their strongest combatant, Traceless Blood, had been easily defeated, not to mention the rest of their team. Less than 5 minutes since their battle with Zero Wing began, they had lost over half their numbers. On the other hand, Zero Wing had not suffered a single death. It was simply inconceivable. At that point, each side's strength had been obvious. They were on completely different levels. Following which, he had issued a command to retreat immediately. When they started retreating, they still had more than 100 players. Now, however, only a dozen or so were alive. Minor Wind had claimed the majority of their members' lives himself. Not only were the Ranger's arrows extremely fast, but he also had ranged AoEs at his disposal. Even Three Knives, who ranked 91st on Starmoon Kingdom's red list, could not defend against all of Minor Wind's attacks, much less the members of his team. Mutual destruction? Minor Wind could not help but laugh. Unfortunately, you are not capable of such a thing. Although Three Knives was strong, superior to even a few members of Zero Wing's main force, the Berserker's skill completion rates were not high. After taking into account the difference in their equipment, Three Knives would rank roughly around 56th in Zero Wing's main force. Of course, this was not taking the power of darkness into consideration. As Minor Wind said so, he knocked his longbow and shot dozens of arrows in quick succession at the remaining red names. Although Three Knives and the other red names tried to approach Minor Wind, over 40 yards stretched them and the Ranger. There was not enough time for them to reach the Ranger. Moreover, of the dozen or so remaining red names, not a single one was a ranged class. Hence, the group had no choice but to weather the rain of arrows as they advanced. However, the Tier 1 weapon Windchaser was no trivial item. With it, Minor Wind could deal over -1,500 damage with his normal attacks alone. Three Knives and the others had, at most, a little over 7,000 HP. A few arrows were enough to finish them off. In addition, Minor Wind's arrows would occasionally trigger the quadruple stars effect. Before the dozen or so red names crossed 10 yards, only Three Knives remained alive. Though the Berserker only had a thread of HP left. The red names lying in ambush were all shocked. With just his bow, Minor Wind single-handedly defeated over a dozen red names before they came anywhere close to him. Even Three Knives was on his last breath. None of the red names lying in wait could believe their eyes. Am I dreaming? Why is that Ranger so powerful? Suddenly, everyone realized that their fellow red names who had gone ahead to ambush Zero Wing were all dead. Moreover, the only survivor had no more than a thread of HP remaining. The gap between the light players in their imaginations and the members of Zero Wing's main force was massive. Oh, you called for reinforcements? Minor Wind shifted his gaze towards the red names hiding in the bushes. With eagle eyes, he noticed more than 400 players. Grinning, he said, "Since Big Sis Fire and the others are not around, let's use you guys to test out my true strength." When the red names heard Minor Wind's words, a sense of doom seeped into their hearts. Minor Wind's attack power was simply too high. Moreover, none of them were confident in escaping his rain of arrows unscathed. Three Knives was the best evidence for the assumption. Suddenly, the leading black-robed elementalist jumped up from his hiding spot and shouted, "W8!" Chapter 695, Flower of Seven Sins. The black-robed elementalist was level 33. On Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list, he would rank within the top 20. The majority of his equipment consisted of level 30 fine gold rank, while the rest was dark gold rank. Particularly his staff, which sported a spiral of flame-red runes, was no ordinary dark gold staff. Sunlight Dust. Three Knives was shocked when he saw the black-robed elementalist reveal himself. "What are you doing here?" Among the top 10 experts on Starmoon Kingdom's red list, Traceless Blood ranked 7th. Meanwhile, Sunlight Dust stood above Traceless Blood, ranking 3rd on the red list. The red list was different from the ranking list. Rather than ranking players by their levels, players on the red list were judged by their strength. It was a far more accurate estimation than the God's Domain experts list the secret pavilion had created. So you're Sunlight Dust, the person who defeated Red Feather, the Star Alliance's apex expert. Minor Wind grew serious as he watched Sunlight Dust. Coldly he asked, "Are you targeting Zero Wing as well?" Red Feather was one of the strongest combatants in the Star Alliance and was an expert who ranked on the God's Domain experts list. The fact that Sunlight Dust could defeat an apex expert like Red Feather showed that the Elementalist should also rank at the top of Starmoon Kingdom. Hence, even he could not afford to be careless around Sunlight Dust. Even the slightest mistake could result in his death. Initially I had only planned to earn a quick buck. Now, however, it seems that won't be possible, Sunlight Dust said as he turned to an empty area near Minor Wind. Shaking his head he said, "Zero Wing really has an abundance of experts. Its fame is not undeserved." Seeing Sunlight Dust's reaction, Three Knives was very confused. With Sunlight Dust's strength and that of his companions, they could make short work of Minor Wind, yet the expert elementalist chose to surrender. A figure suddenly appeared beside Minor Wind. This figure was none other than Flying Shadow, who had been in stealth all this time. "I'm impressed. He actually sensed me from so far away," Flying Shadow muttered in surprise. With his standards, aside from their guild leader, Black Flame, only Fire Dance and Violet Cloud could detect him from such a long distance. One could just imagine how powerful Sunlight Dust was. "You can't expect this matter to end just because you revealed yourself, right?" Flying Shadow growled as he stared at Sunlight Dust. Sunlight Dust and his companions had aimed for Zero Wing from the very beginning. And yet, the instant the situation turned sour, they wanted to just up and leave. It was nothing more than disrespectful. "Of course not," Sunlight Dust said calmly. "I have very useful information for Zero Wing. Let us offer this as compensation. What do you think?" "What kind of information?" Flying Shadow asked. "Currently, only red names and small workshops are targeting Zero Wing. However, this is only the beginning. I've heard that our employer is in the process of hiring the Flower of Seven Sins as well," Sunlight Dust said slowly. At the mention of the name Flower of Seven Sins, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. There were many powers in the virtual gaming world. There were guilds, workshops, and special organizations such as the Flower of Seven Sins. The Flower of Seven Sins was neither a workshop nor a guild. However, the organization's name shook the virtual gaming world. Their fame was so widespread was because the Flower of Seven Sins was an organization specializing in assassination work. They targeted gamers' characters specifically. As long as a virtual reality game possessed a PvP mechanism, the Flower of Seven Sins would be present. And as long as a player could afford their price, whether it was a monster-like gamer or the guild leader of a super guild, the Flower of Seven Sins could assassinate their target. Moreover, these statements were not without proof. In the past, someone had paid to have the guild leader of a super guild eliminated. In the end, the Flower of Seven Sins completed the task. Back then, the organization had greatly angered said super guild, causing said super guild to declare war against the organization. In the end, however, this super guild ceased to exist. The Flower of Seven Sins tore the guild apart thoroughly and removed its name from the virtual gaming world forever. However, the Flower of Seven Sins' asking price was extremely high. No ordinary person could afford it. Fire Dance suddenly appeared in between the two groups. In a grave tone she asked, "Are you telling us the truth?" Fire Dance's sudden appearance surprised even Sunlight Dust, causing the Elementalist to feel an immense pressure. "I actually failed to detect her at such a close distance." Sunlight Dust wore a grave expression as he looked at Fire Dance. This was the first time anyone had come so close to him undetected. He possessed a special skill that granted him greater perception than ordinary players. Otherwise he would not have so easily discovered Flying Shadow. If Fire Dance attacked him at such a close distance he would likely die. Zero Wing really is scary. It's no wonder that person is hiring the Flower of Seven Sins. Sunlight Dust finally realized. He then turned to Fire Dance, smiling bitterly as he responded, "I guarantee that this information is true. However, as to what that person has requested the Flower of Seven Sins to do, even I have no clue. You may leave." Fire Dance dismissed them with a wave of her hand. Whether Sunlight Dust was lying to her or not, she doubted his words. Experts had their own pride to protect. It was especially true for an apex expert like Sunlight Dust. Following which, Sunlight Dust led his team away. As for Three Knives, he was not allowed to leave with his life. Flying Shadow immediately ended the Berserker's life as negotiations ended. As for Sunlight Dust, he did not particularly mind. Although he and Three Knives were both red names, they were not companions and he had no obligation to rescue Three Knives. Big Sis Fire, what are we going to do now? Flying Shadow asked worriedly as he sheathed his daggers. Every player's heart was familiar with the terror of the Flower of Seven Sins. Until today they had never once failed a job. Even super guilds did not dare to provoke the Flower of Seven Sins. Such an organization targeted Zero Wing. Even with Zero Wing's current strength, Flying Shadow doubted that they could fend off the Flower of Seven Sins. This matter is of utmost importance. Let's discuss it with Aqua and guild leader first. Fire Dance had no idea of what to do now. The Flower of Seven Sins' reputation was simply too immense. Anyone who had touched a virtual reality game knew about the organization. The Flower of Seven Sins was a transcendental existence among gamers. If the Flower of Seven Sins truly intended to annihilate Zero Wing, then this would be the greatest danger their guild had ever faced. The top of the world, Mount Sogar. With the aid of two Tier 3 demons, Shifeng finally managed to locate a pair of massive locked doors near the top of Mount Sogar. Engraved runes decorated the stone doors and black chains bound them, each chain giving off a faint pressure. This pressure was familiar to Shifeng. Divine might. Although the divine might the chains exuded was faint, no one who had encountered divine might would forget the sensation. Shifeng had already reached level 34. His level was high enough for him to rank within the top 3 of Starmoon Kingdom's ranking list. On Mount Sogar, however, he was an insignificant existence. If he had not possessed two Tier 3 demons, he would not have made it up to this point. Shifeng had encountered multiple level 50 lords on his way up the mountain. With his strength alone, unless he activated the aura of Space's space movement, he would not have survived. Meanwhile, a gigantic beast stood guard beside the massive pair of stone doors. This quest is absurdly difficult on so many levels. Shifeng inwardly laughed bitterly as he watched the gigantic beast. Nine-headed magic snake, ferocious beast, great lord. Level 55. HP 90, 000, 000/90, 000, 000. Chapter 696, Ferocious Beast. Ferocious beasts were different from general wild and demonic beasts. They belonged to the ancient era. During ancient times, ferocious beasts were monsters that fought even gods. Some ferocious beasts had even managed to kill gods. Ferocious beasts were on the same level as angels and dragons, possessing the strength to challenge opponents of a higher tier. In the past, Shifeng had watched large guilds raid ferocious beasts, and he could describe those battles with a single word: intense. Once, an army of 10,000 elite players and several hundred first-rate and top-tier experts had attempted to raid a ferocious beast. The players had all been above level 100, whereas the ferocious beast had only been level 90. Some of those players had even been Tier 3 classes. In the end, although the players defeated the ferocious beast, over 95% of the elites and half of the experts had died. There was a massive difference in strength between players at level 90 and players at level 100. It was like the difference between level 40 and level 50. Equipment's attributes would undergo a massive improvement at the level 100 threshold. Monsters received a similar boost. Yet, even with such a huge difference, the players who faced off against the ferocious beast still suffered devastating losses. Although the nine-headed magic snake was only a great lord, unlike the level 90 ferocious beast that had been a level 90 grand lord, it was still a much higher level than Shifeng. At the very minimum, it would take a party of level 60 players to take down a level 55 Great Lord ranked ferocious beast. In Shifeng's opinion, if he wanted to kill this ferocious beast, he needed at least 500 level 60 and above tier 2 players. Moreover, they would need excellent equipment. Particularly, their weapons should be at least dark gold rank. Facing the nine-headed magic snake with any less would be suicide. Unlike other monsters, ferocious beasts did not just possess immense combat power. They also possessed the life force passed down from ancient times. In combat, ordinary monsters' battle recovery would only regenerate 1% of their HPs every 5 seconds. Ferocious beasts' battle recovery, on the other hand, regenerated 3% of their HPs every 5 seconds. A ferocious beast's HP already ranked at the very top among monsters. They were practically bug-like existences. The nine-headed magic snake had 90 million HP. In battle, it could recover 2,700,000 HP every 5 seconds. Even if Shi Feng multiplied his damage output by 10, and the Great Lord stood motionless, he could not kill it. With such a powerful monster guarding the doors, it had been made clear that underestimating this quest's difficulty would be a mistake. Even an epic quest wasn't this absurdly difficult. Fortunately, it doesn't seem like I'm required to kill the nine-headed magic snake to pass through those doors. Shi Feng breathed a sigh of relief as he shifted his gaze towards a small circular indentation in the stone doors. The indentation was the perfect size for the elemental core. Weissman had said that the elemental core was both a map and a key. Since there was a keyhole in the stone doors, he just needed to insert the elemental core to open them. Moreover, with the nine-headed magic snake's massive body, it would not be able to cross the threshold. As long as Shi Feng reached the other side of the doors, he should be safe from the ferocious beast. However, trying to open the doors under the snake's nose was not going to be easy. It seems like I'll have to sacrifice the purgatory demon. Shi Feng noticed that the purgatory demon's time in this world was already nearing its end. Since it was going to disappear soon anyway, he might as well put it to good use. The purgatory demon had 13 million HP. It should buy him some time. Immediately, Shi Feng used Phantom Kill and sent his doppelganger away. With this, should his life be in danger, he could escape. As the doppelganger distanced itself from Shi Feng's group, the swordsman directed the purgatory demon to charge towards the nine-headed magic snake. Next to the nine-headed magic snake, which was over 30 meters tall, the purgatory demon looked like an insect. One bite from one of the Great Lord would be enough to devour several purgatory demons. When the purgatory demon was 30 yards away from the nine-headed magic snake, the latter yawned lazily as it whipped its tail forward. Suddenly, the hill-like snake tail appeared before the purgatory demon. Before Shi Feng could react, the snake sent his purgatory demon hurtling into a nearby stone wall. When the purgatory demon slammed into the wall, a damage that the demon had never experienced before appeared above its head. Minus 267,849. Shi Feng's mouth twitched when he saw those numbers. This damage far surpassed his expectations. With a casual strike, the nine-headed magic snake dealt nearly minus 270,000 damage. Despite both creatures being tier 3, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. Since I can't approach it, what about this? Shi Feng did not dare direct the purgatory demon to approach the ferocious beast again. Instead, he used the tier 3 skill, Garuda's Flames. Suddenly, a sea of fire rushed towards the nine-headed magic snake. This time, the ferocious beast finally woke. Suddenly, one of its snakeheads opened its mouth and inhaled. The beast sucked the flaming tide into its mouth, devouring the fire in the blink of an eye. Even Shi Feng was stunned. This was his first battle against a ferocious beast. Although he had known that the purgatory demon was no match for the nine-headed magic snake, he had not expected the ferocious beast to fend off the purgatory demon's attack with little to no effort. The difference between them was absurd. After devouring the sea of fire, that snakehead turned to stare at the purgatory demon. In the next moment, it widened its mouth and spat out a more powerful version of Garuda's Flames. The flames were extremely fast, and it took everything Shi Feng had just to get the purgatory demon to dodge those flames. As for the sturdy stone walls that bore the brunt of the molten attack, not only did the flames effortlessly tear through the walls, but the stone also melted into glowing lava. In an instant, over 50 meters of the stone wall disappeared. Is this the strength of the nine-headed magic snake? Shi Feng was utterly baffled. At this point, he even began to doubt whether the nine-headed magic snake was just a great lord. Even several thousand tier 2 players would not be a match for the ferocious beast. Moreover, based on the magic snake's lazy attitude, it was obvious that the ferocious beast was simply toying with him. It had yet to utilize its true potential. Helpless, Shi Feng could only use his final trump card. The purgatory demon's tier 3 taboo skill, Spatial Suppression. If he could not shift the nine-headed magic snake's attention towards the purgatory demon, he would not have a chance to open the stone doors. The power of a tier 3 taboo skill could rival even an ordinary tier 4 skill. As the nine-headed magic snake was both a great lord and a ferocious beast, its combat power should be equivalent to tier 4. In theory, a tier 3 taboo skill should deal damage to the nine-headed magic snake. Moreover, the damage should be relatively high. When the purgatory demon swung its war axe at the nine-headed magic snake, Feng silently prayed that the attack would wound the Great Lord. Even a small amount of damage would be fine. This time, the nine-headed magic snake finally raised all 9 of its heads, its eyes locked onto the Purgatory Demon's incoming war axe. Suddenly, a hint of gravity appeared in its amber eyes. Let this succeed. Feng tightened his grip around the elemental core, focused on the nine-headed magic snake's reaction. When spatial suppression activated, everything the space surrounding the nine-headed magic snake suddenly grew incomparably heavy. One could not move if they tried. Yet the nine-headed magic snake still moved. Although it was extremely slow, it was still capable of moving under the spatial suppression. However, as its tail moved very slowly, Feng could easily control the Purgatory Demon to avoid the attack. The demon's war axe then struck one of the fierce beast's heads. Boom. The nine-headed magic snake instantly lost that head as it fell to the ground, forming a massive crater. Meanwhile, the other 8 heads simultaneously screamed in pain as a massive amount of damage appeared above them. Minus 605,791. Chapter 697, Super Large-Scale Destruction Spell. After suddenly losing one of its heads, the magic snake's 8 remaining heads glared at the Purgatory Demon, rage filling their amber eyes. Less than a second later, however, the dismembered head grew back. All 9 of the Great Lord's heads then abruptly opened their mouths and spat out a gray beam. Despite receiving a Tier 3 taboo skill, the 9-headed magic snake's combat power had not decreased in the slightest. Not daring to be careless, Feng hurriedly directed the Purgatory Demon to evade the beams and distance itself from the ferocious beast. Anything the snake's beams touched turned into gray stone. However, as the beast had fired 9 gray beams, due to Feng's lack of control over the Purgatory Demon, he accidentally allowed one of the beams to strike on the demon. Instantly, the Purgatory Demon lost over 500,000 HP. Moreover, it was also afflicted with the petrified state, stealing more than 200,000 HP every 2 seconds and 60% of its movement speed for 30 seconds. Isn't this petrification skill a little too strong? Feng used the Aura of Water's skill, Life Bloom, on the Purgatory Demon the moment he saw the debuff's description. While petrified, not only would the Purgatory Demon lose massive amounts of HP, but the 9-headed magic snake could also easily catch up to it due to the movement speed reduction. If that happened, the Purgatory Demon would be a goner in less than 30 seconds. With Life Bloom, however, the Purgatory Demon's HP recovered at an impressive rate. Life Bloom recovered 60% of its target's HP every second. With the Purgatory Demon's 13 million HP, even if the 9-headed magic snake were more powerful, it would not instantly kill the demon. Hence, for the next 40 seconds, the Purgatory Demon was nearly invulnerable. Immediately, Feng used the Purgatory Demon to lure the 9-headed magic snake away from the massive stone doors. Once the ferocious beast was 40 yards away, and Feng was sure that it focused on the Purgatory Demon fully, Feng activated Windwalk and dashed towards the stone doors. Time ticked by second after second. As Feng approached the massive stone doors, his heart rate rose rapidly. If the 9-headed magic snake discovered him now, he would die without a doubt. Even if he relied on the temporarily immortal Purgatory Demon, he could not stop the ferocious beast from grinding him to a pulp. By the time Feng arrived at the stone doors, over 6 seconds had passed. Meanwhile, the Purgatory Demon had lured the 9-headed magic snake 100 yards away from the stone doors and desperately tried to pin it down, earning as much time for Feng as possible. To the 9-headed magic snake, the Purgatory Demon was practically a toy. Again and again, the ferocious beast smashed the Purgatory Demon into the ground, damages in the hundreds of thousands appearing above the demon's head. The Purgatory Demon had no power to resist. Without wasting any time, Feng immediately inserted the elemental core into the small hole in the doors. Suddenly, the magic arrays on the elemental core and inside the circular hole shifted and aligned. They then released a faint, golden light. The runes covering the pair of stone doors lit up, releasing a dazzling golden glow. A moment later, the chains around the stone doors began to shatter. Faster. Hurry up. Feng's anxiety mounted as he watched the chains break, one after another. There were over 20 chains around the doors, yet each one took a full second to break. It would take more than 20 seconds for the stone doors to open. As the chains shattered, the initially weak divine might grew stronger. This is bad. Shi Feng frowned as he turned to the nine-headed magic snake, which currently toyed with the purgatory demon. With the divine might growing stronger, even he could sense it clearly now, not to mention the ferocious beast that had guarded the doors all this time. Sure enough, the nine-headed magic snake sensed the increasing divine might, and it could not help but turn to look at the stone doors. Suddenly, it whipped its tail and sent the purgatory demon flying before turning and slithered towards Shi Feng. Meanwhile, 10 chains remained on the doors. With the nine-headed magic snake's speed, it did not need that much time to reach him. With no other choice, Shi Feng directed the cursed demon to use the Tier 3 skill, Spiritual Blade, to attack the ferocious beast. Spiritual Blade was not just a magical attack skill, it was also capable of forcing its target into a confused state for 15 seconds. The skill could earn him enough time for the doors to open. This time, due to the stone doors being unlocked, the nine-headed magic snake did not bother blocking the Spiritual Blade. Immediately, the ferocious beast received over -300,000 damage, releasing a pained cry as its massive body slid to a halt. Its eyes glazed over slightly. Good. Shi Feng unconsciously sighed with relief. Although the nine-headed magic snake possessed relatively high magic resistance, in the end, it was still only a great lord. A Tier 3 skill should still be effective against it. As the chains continued to shatter, the ferocious beast's glazed eyes gradually regained clarity. By the time the last 3 chains remained, the nine-headed magic snake woke from its stupor. It then released an earth-shaking roar, its cold, amber eyes suddenly turning blood-red. Widening its mouths, it fired multiple gray beams once more. The nine-headed magic snake had spat a total of 9 gray beams. Each one was more than enough to kill Shi Feng instantly. Moreover, the 9 beams sealed off any path of retreat. Shi Feng had nowhere to go. Immediately, Shi Feng activated his replace skill. In the next moment, Shi Feng's doppelganger lost all of its HP as it transformed into a gray statue. Following which, the doppelganger shattered, becoming dust that scattered in the wind. It could not resist the beams in the slightest. Seeing Shi Feng vanish completely, the nine-headed magic snake shifted its attention towards the cursed demon. Shi Feng immediately directed the cursed demon to escape. To the nine-headed magic snake, however, the cursed demon was simply too slow. After the demon had taken a few steps, the ferocious beast caught up to it. With a whip of its tail, the nine-headed magic snake sent the cursed demon into a stone wall, destroying over 400,000 HP instantly. In less than 3 seconds, the cursed demon lost over 2 million HP. This is my chance. Shi Feng realized that all of the chains had finally broken. He activated space movement and arrived before the doors once more. Stretching out his hand, he twisted the elemental core. As the elemental core produced a click sound, the massive stone doors gradually opened. Turning to take a look, the nine-headed magic snake froze. It had never imagined that Shi Feng would appear again. Thinking that its previous skill had been too weak, all 9 of the Great Lord's heads stretched open their jaws once more. This time, however, the heads did not spit gray beams. Suddenly, a massive threefold magic array appeared above the stone doors. The sky suddenly darkened as black winds moaned. The massive magic array covered a radius of 300 yards, and even the distant purgatory demon and cursed demon were within the ferocious beast's attack range. Shi Feng's excited expression dropped. Shi Feng had seen this spell before. The Tier 3 curse, Dark Gale. The curse was a super large-scale destruction spell that lasted 10 full seconds. At this moment, Shi Feng had no defense against this spell. The 7 Luminaries ring was still on cooldown, so he could not switch to the Aura of Earth or the Aura of Illusion. As for Defensive Blade, the skill's block counts were not enough to block the Dark Gale completely. As the Black Gale tore at him, Shi Feng said his prayers as he activated Defensive Blade. The wind devoured all life it touched. In the blink of an eye, the Defensive Blade's 9 block counts had been exhausted. Dark Gale had caused 9 instances of damage in just 1 second. Even with his Tier 1 Defensive Blade, Shi Feng would not last 2 seconds. Meanwhile, the Purgatory Demon and Cursed Demon each lost nearly 500,000 HP every second. The 9-headed magic snake's damage was terrifying. What a pity. As the black wind surrounded him, Shi Feng felt somewhat disappointed. He was a thread away from opening and entering the stone doors. He had never imagined that the 9-headed magic snake would be so vicious to use a Tier 3 curse. Moreover, it was a super large-scale destruction spell. The ferocious beast gave him no chance. As the black wind swept in for a second attack. Suddenly, the threefold magic array in the sky began to disappear. The dark gale also dissipated into nothingness. Before Shifeng could figure out what was happening, the nine-headed magic snake cried painfully as its body rapidly turned into stone. It then shattered into dust and rubble. 3 shimmering items fell on top of the pile of rubble. The sound of a system notification suddenly reached Shifeng's ears. This is... Chapter 698, Strengthening Device. By now, Shifeng was quite familiar with the nine-headed magic snake's strength. To current players it was practically invincible. It didn't matter how many players came here to raid it. Meanwhile, in Shifeng's mind, he had never actually thought of killing the nine-headed magic beast. Since the beginning, he had only thought of luring it away from the stone doors. He had never expected the Great Lord to die. For a time Shifeng was speechless. However, when he heard the sound of the system notification, he more or less understood what had happened. System, blood refining passage has been opened. Do you wish to enter? Time remaining, 1 hour 59 minutes. So it turns out that, as this place's guardian beast, if the stone doors open, the guardian dies. It's no wonder why the nine-headed magic snake was so desperate. Shifeng inwardly celebrated as he stared at the rubble that used to be the nine-headed magic snake. Unfortunately, he had not killed the snake. Otherwise, with the EXP from the ferocious beast, he might have risen several levels. With the stone doors open and quite some time before they closed again, Shifeng did not hurry into the blood-refining passage. Instead, he approached the nine-headed magic snake's remains, hoping to take a closer look at what items the ferocious beast had dropped. Although he was not responsible for the nine-headed magic snake's death, as a monster, it would still drop some items after dying. Only it would drop significantly fewer items. The nine-headed magic snake had been a Great Lord-ranked ferocious beast. Even the most inferior item it would drop was not something one would find from an ordinary Great Lord. Among the 3 items, one was a magical, pure black cube covered with blood-red runes. The item was called Blood Refining Stone, and it could be used inside the blood refining world. As for the other 2 items, one was a silver, fang-like dagger, while the other was a drawing. Sure enough, a ferocious beast's loot is amazing. It even dropped an epic dagger. Shifeng was momentarily stunned. Petrified Thorn, dagger epic rank. Level 40 to level 100. Equipment requirement, Strength 550, Agility 400. Attributes adjust according to user's level. Attack power plus 1165, currently level 40. Strength plus 92, Agility plus 101, Endurance plus 60. Strength increased by 10%. Agility increased by 10%. Attack speed plus 12. Evasion plus 20. All skills plus 2 levels. Ignore levels plus 20. Ignore 20% of the target's defense. Damage from sneak attacks increased by 20%. Level requirement to equip all items decreased by 5 levels. Durability 300/300. Attacks half. 30% chance to inflict petrified effect, reducing target's weapon damage by 10% each second and movement speed by 60% for 6 seconds. 30% chance to trigger fatal blow effect, increasing damage by 220%. Additional skill 1 dash. Devour magic. Absorbs magic damage equal to 300% of user's maximum HP for 15 seconds. Damage absorbed can be converted into a single attack, dealing twice the amount of damage absorbed to an area of 5 by 50 yards in front of user. Cooldown, 10 minutes. Additional skill 2 dash. Petrification domain. Enemies within 50 yards receive 500% weapon damage and have their movement speed reduced by 50% for 10 seconds. Increases the user's agility, strength, and movement speed with each target hit. Agility and strength can increase to a maximum of 30%, while movement speed can increase to a maximum of 100% for 30 seconds. Cooldown 1 hour. Fire Dance really lucked out this time. She'll be able to equip this once she reaches level 40. Only the dagger's strength requirement is somewhat high. I'll have to figure out a way to increase her strength. Shifeng happily stored away the petrified thorn. Although the True Fire Blade's Fire Dance wielded were top-tier dark gold weapons, they were on a completely different level compared to the petrified thorn. At the end of the day, even the most powerful dark gold weapon was only a mortal's weapon. An epic weapon, on the other hand, was a true extraordinary weapon. The Petrified Thorn's attack power was especially frightening. The dagger's 1165 attack power was even higher than a level 40 dark gold ranked two-handed weapon. Not to mention there were the strength and agility increases the dagger provided. If Fire Dance equipped this dagger, she could slice through players as if she were dicing vegetables. Following which, Shifeng's gaze shifted towards the tattered drawing. Strengthening device forging design. Can strengthen player equipment, significantly reducing the consumption of durability. Required materials: 1 magic crystal, 10 mithril or 2 intermediate mana recovery potions, and 1 basic alchemy array. Is this real? Even something like this dropped? Shifeng muttered in surprise. In God's domain, monsters would grow more powerful as they reached higher levels. Take the monsters players currently faced for example. Not only did they possess very high attack power, but they could also significantly reduce equipment durability. It was why the various guilds were forced to repair their equipment in Stone Forest Town. Players could repair weapons with whetstones and advanced whetstones. However, there were no such recovery items for equipment. However, there were items that could reinforce equipment. The strengthening device was one such item. Only its forging design was extremely hard to obtain. It only dropped from level 50 and above Great Lord ranked field bosses. Dungeons would not drop the design. Moreover, the strengthening device was a consumable item. It could not be permanently equipped. Fortunately, the forging process was very simple, and the item also had relatively high durability. Players could put it to good use for a relatively long period. If they dodged attacks properly, they could extend the strengthening device's lifespan even further. However, one of the raw materials required was not that easy to obtain. While mithril or intermediate mana recovery potions and basic alchemy arrays were both cheap and easily available, it was a different story for magic crystals. Magic crystals were always rare and valuable. Hence, crafting strengthening devices was expensive. Each one would cost roughly 30 silver to produce. Even so, there were still a large number of players willing to purchase it. While ordinary players were willing to waste some time traveling back to towns and cities to repair their equipment, large guilds were not as willing. To them, time was money. In the past, a strengthening device's standard price was 2 gold. During its peak, however, the price soared to 4 gold due to high demand and low supply. Currently, the various large guilds of Starmoon Kingdom and several neighboring kingdoms had sent many of their members to the Stoneclaw Mountains. Obviously, the strengthening devices could offer some convenience. Just the amount of time and repair fees the strengthening devices could save them were worth more than 4 gold. It seems I'll have to find some opportunity to grind level 50 field Great Lords. With 1 strengthening device forging design, I won't even be able to produce enough for the guild members. Shifeng suddenly thought of a profitable business idea. If he waited too long, the strengthening devices would not be as profitable. Just as Shifeng finished organizing his items and was about to enter the blood refining passage, he suddenly discovered over 100 unread messages in his inbox. Among them, over 90% were from Aqua Rose. There were also messages from Gentle Snow and Fire Dance. They had all sent these messages around the same time. After he had reached Mount Sogar's core, he had worried that he would get himself killed while receiving a message. Hence, he had blocked all calls and messages for the time being. What happened? Why are they so anxious? Shifeng wondered as he opened the messages. Chapter 699, Banished. The Flower of 7 Sins. A serious expression overcame Shifeng when he saw this name. He had not expected that exemplary Willow to be so vicious. It would have been fine had she just hired a bunch of red names and small workshops to harass Zero Wing. At most, it would make things a little difficult for the guild. However, it was a completely different story if she hired the Flower of 7 Sins. As a mysterious assassin organization of the virtual gaming world, nearly every virtual reality game contained traces of the Flower of 7 Sins. In the past, the Flower of 7 Sins had even developed itself into one of God's domain's peak powers. No guild could afford to offend the Flower of 7 Sins. As long as one could afford the organization's price, these assassins could even take out a super guild's guild leader. Everyone was afraid of them. In the past, 5 super guilds had banded together to suppress the Flower of 7 Sins, threatening to retaliate if the organization accepted any assassination requests on their respective guilds' upper echelons. Unfortunately, those super guilds' efforts had been futile. In less than 10 days, all 5 super guilds gave up on suppressing the assassin organization. The Flower of Seven Sins had made a statement by killing their upper echelons once. There were even god-ranked experts among those who had died. From then on, the various super guilds in God's domain no longer bothered with the Flower of Seven Sins. Back then, the incident had shaken God's domain. The Flower of Seven Sins had become a power that no one would dare provoke. However, the organization's asking price was also extraordinarily high. Even open-source corporations should feel a sting from the cost of hiring the organization. Exemplary Willow must have hired the Flower of Seven Sins to deal with Zero Wing's upper echelons. Even OSC can't afford to target the entire guild. Shifeng gave the situation some thought. The best method to deal with Zero Wing was to kill the guild's upper echelons to level 0. This would certainly collapse both Zero Wing's strength and reputation. As for the possibility of the Flower of Seven Sins failing to carry out their contract. Since its creation, the Flower of Seven Sins had never once failed a job. Their strength was practically endless. Even Shifeng was not confident of surviving an assassination attempt from the Flower of Seven Sins right now, not to mention the guild's other members. If I remember correctly, before the Flower of Seven Sins takes action, the organization usually invests some time to investigate their target, before taking action. In the past, the Flower of Seven Sins would take anywhere from 5 to 10 days to collect information. If Exemplary Willow went directly to them and hired the organization after she returned from our meeting, I should still have roughly 4 days before the organization takes action. If their target is much stronger than their initial estimations, the Flower of Seven Sins will adjust their quote to their employer and will only take action after their employer agrees to the new price. Right now, the best way to avoid this mess is to increase the strength of the guild's upper echelons significantly within 4 days, forcing the Flower of Seven Sins to renew their price. If that happened, Exemplary Willow might not consider the price worth it and give up on the organization altogether. Shifeng had some understanding of the Flower of Seven Sins rules and pricing. Killing a system-recognized, third-rate expert cost 500,000 credits. The price increased depending on the expert's strength. Moreover, this was only the price for one death. As for system-recognized, second-rate experts, the minimum asking price was 3 million credits. The minimum price for first-rate experts was 10 million credits. Top-tier experts cost 100 million credits at the very minimum. Above them would be apex experts, and the organization charged upwards of 500 million credits for each kill. Ordinary people could never afford the Flower of Seven Sins. Only those large guilds and corporations with significant financial strength could do so. However, rather than spend so much money to kill an opponent, it was more cost-effective to send their own men to get the job done. Hence, only when one had no other options would they employ the Flower of Seven Sins. This was precisely the case for Exemplary Willow right now. At this point, even the Star Alliance was helpless against Zero Wing in the Star Moon Kingdom, not to mention Twilight Echo, which did not have the home ground advantage. The cost of killing Zero Wing's upper echelons to level 0 was astronomical. Only a massive existence like the open-source corporation could afford such a price. Currently, the Flower of Seven Sins had yet to determine the strength of Zero Wing's upper echelons. Based on Shifeng's estimates, killing a 5th-floor expert of the Trial Tower should cost at least 500,000 credits. A 6th-floor expert would cost at least 3 million credits. A 7th-floor expert would cost around 10 million credits, and an 8th-floor expert should cost at least 100 million credits. Currently, Zero Wing upper management consisted of more than 20 players, and the majority were 6th-floor experts. Only Fire Dance and Violet Cloud had reached the 7th floor. If everyone could improve their strength, the cost of killing them would increase exponentially. At that time, even OSC would have to reconsider. Following which, Shifeng contacted Aqua Rose, instructing her to turn the guild's upper echelons' focus on improving their strength and progressing through the Trial Tower as much as possible. Shifeng would also go all out to supply everyone with the 100-berry wine. Although Aqua Rose did not understand Shifeng's intentions, since he had given the order, she had no choice but to do as he wished. For a time, Zero Wing's upper echelons ceased grinding monsters in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Instead, they focused on their progression in the Trial Tower. As for Gentle Snow's message, she wanted to inform Shifeng of OSC's investment into the Star Alliance, becoming one of the guild's major shareholders. She also stated that OSC intended to deal with Zero Wing, so he should be wary of the Star Alliance. Naturally, Shifeng had already taken appropriate measures to protect Zero Wing. Hence, not long after Shifeng read Gentle Snow's message, shocking news spread throughout Starmoon City. Stone Forest Town was no longer open to the Star Alliance. Any guild that was affiliated with the Star Alliance was also barred from Stone Forest Town. This incident instantly attracted the attention of every player in the capital city. Everyone was confused as to why Zero Wing would suddenly declare war against the Star Alliance. The Stoneclaw Mountains had long since become an iconic symbol of Starmoon City. Meanwhile, Stone Forest Town was an indispensable resting place for players grinding in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Without this resting place, the Star Alliance would fall far behind the other guilds. Of course, the Star Alliance could seek the aid of others to help them repair their equipment in Stone Forest Town. However, Shifeng had prepared for that as well. Shifeng had limited the amount of equipment players could repair. In other words, in addition to one's own equipment, players visiting Stone Forest Town could only help one other player repair a set of equipment once. Moreover, he also placed a limit on the players' levels. Only players who were level 30 or above were allowed to repair their equipment in the town. With this, he restricted the Star Alliance's options of repairing equipment in Stone Forest Town. Can someone tell me what is going on here? When Galaxy Past received this information, he nearly jumped out of his seat from anger. The situation had changed so suddenly that even Galaxy Past did not understand what had happened. Why had Zero Wing turned against them? The Star Alliance had only considered striking out against Zero Wing. The guild had yet to take such considerations seriously. Yet, Zero Wing chose to humiliate the Star Alliance publicly. The Star Alliance had already mobilized the majority of its combat power to the Stoneclaw Mountains. If the Star Alliance's members could not rest in Stone Forest Town, how was the guild supposed to compete with the other guilds? Silence filled conference hall. This was the first time anyone had seen Galaxy Pass so furious. Guild leader, maybe Zero Wing made this move because they think that we are becoming too big of a threat? Purple Eye was also confused by Zero Wing's drastic actions. They had clearly minded their own business until just recently. Zero Wing must have found out about OSC's investment into the Star Alliance, Red Feather reasoned. Even if we have OSC's support, there is no reason for this. Zero Wing has clearly made us out to be their greatest enemy, Purple Eye said as she shook her head. Go. Contact Black Flame immediately. Galaxy Past agreed with Purple Eye's opinion. He needed to sort out this matter with Black Flame properly. Chapter 700, Improving Swordsmanship. After Shifeng finished dealing with Zero Wing, he entered the blood refining passage. Regarding the Flower of Seven Sins, he could only focus on growing stronger. He had already obtained an epic weapon, and he was nowhere near completing the Solomon's Treasure quest. If he completed the quest, he might be able to upgrade his equipment. If he could obtain an epic weapon for himself, his combat power would rise significantly. Is this the blood refining passage? Shifeng found his surroundings somewhat stifling. The blood refining passage was a long and narrow passageway. Shifeng could not even see the passage's end. Numerous blood-red runes had been carved into the walls on either side, radiating a faint divine might that made him very uncomfortable. It felt as if he were submerged in water. Even walking down the passageway was difficult. If he had to fight in such an environment, he wouldn't be able to exert even half of his normal strength. The moment Shifeng entered the passageway, the large, stone doors had closed, preventing any retreat. Right now, his only option to escape was to give up on the quest and use a return scroll. Since his path of retreat had been closed off, Shifeng could only advance down the walkway. However, before Shifeng had covered a distance of 100 yards, two monsters suddenly emerged from the walls on either side of the passage. These two monsters wore blood-red armor and wielded silvery white bone spears. Blood Fighter, Undead Elite Rank. Level 50. HP 100, 000/100, 000. Undead. Shifeng unconsciously breathed a sigh of relief as he looked at the two 3-meter-tall blood warriors. Luckily, they're just level 50 elites. With the divine might suppression, the strength he could exert was limited. If a chieftain had appeared, he would have had no choice but to summon a tier 3 demon. However, the magic amplification scroll had limited uses. Shifeng did not want to waste them. After the two blood fighters appeared, they immediately charged at Shifeng while thrusting their spears, each spear splitting into 3. They fought like experts who had known the same weapon for many years. All 6 spears aimed for Shifeng's vital points. With the 2 blood fighters working together, even Shifeng could not avoid all of their attacks. Such skill. Shifeng was slightly surprised. The blood fighter's spearmanship was on par with experts who specialized with the spear. In a fight without skills, even elite players would stand no chance against these blood fighters. Shifeng retreated, dodging the oncoming attacks as much as possible. From time to time he used his swords to block an attack. The passage was somewhat narrow, and the 2 blood fighters took up the entire path. He had no room to circle to their sides, he could only face them head-on. Die. After Shifeng tested blood fighter skills, he took half a step back and raised the abyssal blade, intending to use Thundering Flash to end this battle quickly. In the next moment, the abyssal blade transformed into a streak of black light as it descended. However, the usual blue electric arcs did not appear. The 2 blood fighters did not receive any damage whatsoever. On the contrary, one of them thrust its spear at Shifeng's head fiercely. Hurriedly, Shifeng repelled the oncoming spear with Purgatory's shadow in his other hand, deftly evading the silver spear. I can't use skills? Shifeng felt his head begin to ache. Skills were a player's advantage against monsters. If a player could not use any of their skills, then more than half of their advantage over monsters would be gone. However, Shifeng was not a greenhorn. During God's Domain's initial stages, players normally relied on skills in a battle. However, battles between experts were usually fought without any skills. Instead, they relied on their techniques against each other. The 2 blood fighters were indeed powerful. However, their attack patterns were overly monotonous and lacked flexibility. To a sword expert like Shifeng, a few exchanges were all he needed to find a gap to damage the 2 elites. When the abyssal blade slashed at a gap in one of the blood fighter's crimson armor, that blood fighter immediately retreated by a step, a crack appearing on the white bone beneath the armor. A damage of -1056 points then appeared above the blood fighter's head. Such a powerful defense and mana body. Shifeng had a very clear understanding of how high his attack power was. Not to mention, the abyssal blade even bore a magic device that increased its destructive power drastically. Against a level 50 elite monster, he should be able to deal at least -1500 damage. His strike should also affect his target's combat power to some extent, not to mention an attack that had struck a vital point. Yet he had only dealt slightly over -1000 damage after striking the blood fighter's bone. Moreover, only a small crack had appeared on said bone. The blood fighter's defense could already rival that of a chieftain-ranked monster. However, after repelling one blood fighter, the space available to him increased significantly. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Shifeng quickly dashed to the other blood fighter's side, stabbing Purgatory's shadow into the blood fighter's arm joint and forcing the elite's attack to a stop. Immediately after, the abyssal blade struck one of the blood fighter's vital points. One hit at the joints and one hit at a vital point. Shifeng repeated this combination attack, preventing the blood fighter from retaliating as its HP rapidly decreased. Even though the blood fighter had 100,000 HP, the damage would slowly accumulate if Shifeng continued dealing -1000 or so damage with his attacks. In less than 5 minutes, both blood fighters fell to the ground, becoming no more than a pile of bones and armor while dropping a piece of level 50 common equipment and a few dozen copper coins. They had also provided Shifeng with an ample amount of EXP. In the next moment, the red mist that the blood fighters released upon death suddenly flowed into Shifeng's body. System: Blood Refining Stone has obtained 1 point of blood energy. System: Blood Refining Stone has obtained 1 point of blood energy. This is... Shifeng took out the blood refining stone which he had obtained from the 9-headed magic snake. The pitch-black stone gave off a faint red glow. Its information had also changed. Blood Refining Stone can evolve into a blood refining crystal after absorbing 1000 points of blood energy. 2/1000. Although Shifeng did not know what use there was to upgrading the blood refining stone into a blood refining crystal, after giving it some thought, he realized that it might be a crucial key to completing his quest. Moreover, the blood fighters had provided an ample amount of EXP. It was roughly 3 times that of an ordinary level 50 elite. Hence, this wasn't a bad place to level up. Following which, Shifeng continued along the passageway. He would encounter blood fighters every so often. However, as he progressed down the passage, more blood fighters appeared with each ambush. From the initial 2, the number gradually increased to 3, then 4. However, this was still not the greatest change. As the number of blood fighters increased, their attacks became more accurate. By the time Shifeng faced 4 blood fighters at the same time, their spearmanship had also become far more flexible. Their attack patterns began to vary as well. Killing the blood fighters became more of a challenge, and the time it took for him to end each battle increased significantly. After 3 to 4 hours of intense, non-stop combat, even an elite player would feel mentally exhausted. Fortunately, Shifeng had long since adapted to God's domain's battles. Rather than feeling tired, he felt elated when fighting these blood fighters. It was not very often that he could fight in a life-or-death battle purely involving techniques. Without being able to use his skills, Shifeng gradually noticed the deficiencies in his own swordsmanship. While he possessed plenty of attack methods, he lacked methods to defend himself with his swords, and he would often make up for this gap by relying on movement. Hence, Shifeng began to use his swordsmanship for both attacking and defending, no longer relying on his agility to evade oncoming attacks. As Shifeng engaged in more battles, his defensive swordsmanship improved. Initially, he still had to evade attacks every so often against 2 blood fighters simultaneously. After a few hours, however, Shifeng no longer needed to evade the attacks. He could fend off all of the attacks with his 2 swords. Another change has occurred? Just as Shifeng prepared to deal with the next batch of blood fighters, the elites stopped appearing. Instead, a skeleton wielding a 2-handed saber and wearing exquisite armor pulled away from one of the walls. Life filled the skeleton's flashing red eyes. It was completely different from the robotic blood fighters. Chapter 701, Blood Warrior. Wah. The skeleton in black-spiked armor suddenly brandished its 2-handed saber, creating a powerful gale that engulfed Shifeng. His blade work is so fast. I didn't see the weapon move at all. Shifeng unconsciously tightened his grip on the abyssal blade. He felt an immense pressure as he stared at the flashing red flames in the skeleton's eye sockets. Blood Warrior, Undead, Special Elite. Level 50. HP 240, 000/240, 000. Although the Blood Warrior's HP was not high, its attack speed and strength were on a whole different level compared to the Blood Fighters. Suddenly, the Blood Warrior stomped its foot. Shifeng only heard the sound of a sonic boom before the Blood Warrior appeared right in front of him, its massive saber transforming into a streak of silver light as it descended towards his head. In terms of strength and speed, the Blood Warrior was simply overwhelming. Although Shifeng had stretched his perception to its very limit, the Blood Warrior's explosive power still caught him unprepared. Boom. When the Blood Warrior swung its saber, the saber light extended over 10 yards. If the walkway had not been indestructible, the undead's attack would have gouged the ground. Meanwhile, the attack had sent Shifeng flying over 20 yards, a damage of more than -1,000 points appearing above his head. In the blink of an eye, Shifeng lost 1/10 of his HP. So powerful. Shifeng gaped at the Blood Warrior with a face. His entire arm was numb. It was not surprising that the Special Elite was stronger and faster than he was. What was surprising was the fact that the Blood Warrior had an expert's techniques as well. Neither its movement nor attacks contained any excess movement whatsoever. This allowed the undead to exert astonishing speed and destructive power. Even Shifeng had only barely blocked the attack with his sword. Suddenly, Shifeng was no longer as complacent as he had been against the Blood Fighters. Players had 2 main advantages against monsters. The first was their skills, while the second was combat techniques. However, inside the Blood Refining Passage, players could not use any of their skills and could only rely on their combat techniques in a fight. As for the Blood Warrior before Shifeng, not only did it possess superior attributes, but its techniques surpassed even ordinary expert players. If an ordinary expert stood in Shifeng's place right now, they would have no strength to resist the Blood Warrior. Just as Shifeng pondered ways to deal with the Blood Warrior, the latter charged for Shifeng once more, giving him no time to catch his breath. The Blood Warrior slashed its 2-handed saber at Shifeng in quick succession, every one of its attacks faster than Shifeng's visual perception. Shifeng could only rely on his intuition to block or dodge the attacks. He did not even have time to breathe. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. Countless saber lights intertwined, generating dazzling sparks as they collided with Shifeng's swords. Each time Shifeng blocked the Blood Warrior's saber, he was sent flying. Even while Shifeng soared through the air, the Blood Warrior showed no signs of stopping its assault. As long as Shifeng erred in his judgment, he would be executed on the spot. Shifeng was thrown over 100 yards in quick succession, his body slamming into the ground. The difference between their strengths was obvious at first glance. Is this really a level 50 special elite? Shifeng looked at his own HP. He had less than 3,000 HP remaining. At most he could receive 3 more hits before his life ended. Before Shifeng could even consider his options, the Blood Warrior appeared before him. Attacking with its saber, it sent Shifeng flying once more. Since Shifeng had rejoined God's domain, he had suppressed his opponents with his strength. This was the first time an opponent had beaten him so badly regarding strength and speed. In the face of absolute strength, all manner of trickery was useless. At this moment, Shifeng was reminded of the fact that attributes were the basics of combat in God's domain. Even if Shifeng could perceive the Blood Warrior's attack trajectories, he simply could not keep up with the special elite's speed. If he could not even dodge the Blood Warrior's attacks, there was no point in considering a counterattack. If Shifeng received the Blood Warrior's saber a few more times, Shifeng's HP would be no more. Shifeng suddenly realized that the Blood Warrior had stopped attacking him. Instead, it turned around and walked back to where it came from, no longer interested in Shifeng. What's going on here? Despite needing only 2 more hits to end the battle, the Blood Warrior had stopped attacking him. Did I move out of its field of activity? Shifeng accepted this conclusion after giving it some thought. Otherwise, the Blood Warrior had no reason to spare him. It seems that I need to defeat the Blood Warrior if I wish to continue forward. However, with his current strength, it was utterly impossible to defeat the Blood Warrior. It would be easier without the Divine Might's suppression. Shifeng thought as he glared at the passage walls. The Divine Might radiating from the walls had limited his strength significantly. Otherwise, he would not have been so helpless against the Blood Warrior's attacks. If I wish to pass the Blood Warrior, I only have 3 options. I can reduce the Divine Might's suppression, improve my combat techniques, or improve my attributes. Without any of my skills, weakening the Divine Might will be impossible. As for techniques, that is not something I can improve significantly in a short time. It seems that my only choice is to raise my attributes. Shifeng then looked at his current level. At this point he was at 61% of level 34. He was very close to reaching level 35. He currently wore a tier 1 set equipment. As his level increased, the set's attributes would improve as well. Level 35 was considered a small milestone for equipment. Moreover, he also possessed epic and fragmented legendary ranked items. Once he reached level 35, those attributes would also increase. Let's level up then. Shifeng halted his advance. Instead, he retraced his steps. Shifeng had mostly grasped the blood refining passage's rules. He would encounter different monsters depending on where he was. Since he had entered the field belonging to the Blood Warrior, if he retreated to the previous field, his would return to the 4 blood fighters. Fortunately, the blood fighters provided a lot of EXP, so Shifeng did not level slowly. Moreover, he could also improve his techniques by facing the elite monsters. In such a way, Shifeng began an endless journey of grinding, his level rising little by little. Starmoon City, inside a VIP room of one of Starmoon's high-class restaurants. Currently, 3 people, 2 women and 1 man, occupied the luxurious and spacious room. All 3 were at least level 32. 1 woman had already reached level 33. This woman was none other than Zero Wing's vice leader, Aqua Rose. Sitting across from Aqua Rose were the Star Alliance's guild leader, Galaxy Past, and the Star Alliance's #1 elementalist expert, Purple Eye. Vice Leader Aqua, let's be frank. Why did Zero Wing suddenly decide to banish the Star Alliance from Stone Forest Town? I don't recall our guild provoking your guild in any way, Galaxy Past asked quietly, trying his best to suppress the raging fire within him. The Star Alliance's progression into the Stoneclaw Mountains had slowed significantly. If this situation persisted, their previous advantages would vanish, and other guilds would overtake them. Had it not tasted the fruit known as Stone Forest Town, it would have been fine. However, after experiencing the benefits that Stone Forest Town offered, it was impossible for the Star Alliance to endure losing access to the town. Guild Leader Galaxy, don't tell me that you've agreed to Open Source Corporation's investment without knowing what was happening? Aqua Rose countered calmly. Or does Guild Leader Galaxy not know what kind of people have been harassing Zero Wing recently? After Aqua Rose's reminder, Galaxy Past quickly came to a realization. He had received some information mentioning a small conflict between Zero Wing and Open Source Corporation. However, he had never imagined that this enmity was so severe. Guild Leader Galaxy, I believe that you should have a general understanding of the situation. Today, I've come here to pass on a message from our guild leader. Narrowing her eyes, Aqua Rose coldly declared, if the Star Alliance doesn't enter an alliance with Zero Wing now, then it will be our enemy. What is your decision? Chapter 702 Swift and Ruthless. Become your enemy? Galaxy Past let out a laugh as he raised an eyebrow, a flame of anger igniting in his eyes. However, he quickly suppressed the emotion. Chuckling softly, he said, Guild Leader Black Flame really hasn't changed. Although he had known about Black Flame's arrogance, he could not help his anger when it turned on him. However, he had to admit that, up until this point, not one guild had managed to do anything to Zero Wing. Aqua, you're saying that Zero Wing intends to go to war if the Star Alliance refuses to become its ally? Purple Eye asked, a hint of cold surfacing on her white, delicate cheeks. The killing intent she radiated even dropped the surrounding temperature by several degrees. The Star Alliance was a first-rate guild. Its survival until now spoke volumes to its strength. Why would it possibly cower due to an upstart guild? Besides, the Star Alliance currently had OSC support. Starmoon City was the Star Alliance's home ground. If an all-out war broke out between their two guilds, Zero Wing would suffer tremendous losses. If not for Stone Forest Town, the Star Alliance would have lashed out against Zero Wing in the Stoneclaw Mountains long ago. You can interpret it as such, Aqua Rose nodded in acknowledgement. Shifeng's method was indeed crazy. Dealing with Open Source Corporation was already a huge headache. Now he planned to tear away all pretenses with the Star Alliance. This decision would only place Zero Wing in even greater danger. Currently, Zero Wing was not in particularly advantageous position. Aside from overwhelming Smile Heaven's Burial, and the other White River City guilds eyeing Zero Wing covetously, now they needed to deal with Open Source Corporation and the Star Alliance. If Zero Wing declared war on the Star Alliance, it went without saying that overwhelming Smile and Heaven's Burial would also take action. At that time, Zero Wing would be exposed to attacks from the front and the rear. However, when dealing with a problem, one must be both swift and ruthless. Since they already knew that the Star Alliance had fallen under OSC's control, there was no doubt that the first-rate guild would become Zero Wing's enemy in the future. If they maintained the current peace, they would only prolong the inevitable. Zero Wing would eventually be at risk. Moreover, by declaring war on the Star Alliance, it would deter the other guilds. They would have to think twice before plotting against Zero Wing. Currently, as the Star Alliance had the home ground advantage, even without Stone Forest Town, the guild could continue their development in the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, the other guilds did not have that advantage. So what if we don't become allies? Galaxy Past sneered. In a low growl, he asked, do you think the Star Alliance needs a rest stop like Stone Forest Town? Once the 15-day protection period is over and Zero Wing loses their NPC guards, the Star Alliance will be able to occupy the town at any given moment. Moreover, I believe that the other large guilds will also be very interested in the town. Guild Leader Galaxy is correct. However, might I remind you that Zero Wing has not yet started a war with the Star Alliance. Our guilds have not had any conflicts with each other in the Stoneclaw Mountains. If we go to war, however, Zero Wing cannot guarantee the safety of the Star Alliance members in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Guild Leader Galaxy, you know that Starmoon City doesn't have only one first-rate guild. Aqua Rose paid no attention whatsoever to Galaxy Past's threat. Zero Wing had the support of Stone Forest Town. Even if its members died, they could simply revive in the town. Ouroboros's members, Zero Wing's allies, could also revive in Stone Forest Town. Hence, Ouroboros could quickly send reinforcements into the Stoneclaw Mountains. Aside from Stone Forest Town, the nearest town players could revive and was over 10 hours away. If a fight broke out in the Stoneclaw Mountains, the Star Alliance's members would have to waste a lot of time to return. Aqua Rose refused to think about the resources and manpower that would go to waste. If the war persisted, it would definitely wear down the Star Alliance. Galaxy Past and Purple Eye's expressions grew serious upon hearing Aqua Rose's words. Yet, if they allied with Zero Wing, Open Source Corporation would not be pleased. How could the Guild Elders ever agree to an alliance that would anger a god of fortune like Open Source Corporation? Even his position as the Star Alliance's guild leader would be at risk. However, Galaxy Past did not wish to start a full-blown war with Zero Wing right now. Seeing Galaxy Past's troubled expression, Aqua Rose stifled a sigh heavy with emotion. Zero Wing had only recently established, yet with no backing whatsoever, it had become an existence that could even trouble the guild leader of a first-rate guild. Nothing like this had ever occurred during the virtual gaming world's long history. If the Star Alliance allies Zero Wing, our guild leader has promised to let the Star Alliance repair its equipment in Stone Forest Town at market price. Its members will also be able to revive in Stone Forest Town. In addition, the Star Alliance will be allowed to construct a guild residence in Stone Forest Town, allowing its guild members to transfer to the town swiftly and save on travel time, Aqua Rose said, her bright, charming lips curling into an alluring smile. What did you say? Galaxy Past's composure shattered. For a moment he wondered if he had heard wrong. If Aqua Rose's words were true, then the Star Alliance's development speed in the Stoneclaw Mountains would rise by multiple times. Purple Eye was similarly shocked. She had never imagined that Zero Wing would be so generous. I've said all that needed to be said. I look forward to Guild Leader Galaxy's decision. We will only wait one day. After saying so, Aqua Rose turned and left the VIP room. Zero Wing's biggest problem right now was not the Star Alliance, but the Flower of Seven Sins. Hence, the guild's upper echelons needed to improve their strength quickly and prepare. Aqua Rose would not waste her time with the Star Alliance. Right now, she needed to challenge the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower. Sure Feng was going all out to provide the upper echelons with the 100-berry wine. They would be fools not to use it. Hence, both Fire Dance and Aqua Rose fully immersed themselves in the Trial Tower. As for the Stoneclaw Mountains, they could leave that to the guild's core members. After Aqua Rose left, Galaxy Past and Purple Eye remained within the luxurious room. Guild leader, what should we do? Purple Eye asked, a hesitant expression on her face. Both the OSC's funding and Stone Forest Town's resources were sorely tempting. However, both organizations were just as threatening. No matter which side they chose, the consequences would not be light. If it were up to me, I would agree to Zero Wing's offer. However, the guild's main purpose when it established was to earn money for the company. The investment of a god of fortune like OSC is something all guilds strive for. Galaxy Past laughed bitterly. However, now that I think about it, this was all due to Zero Wing. OSC only chose to invest in the Star Alliance to deal with Zero Wing. Purple, gather the guild elders for a meeting immediately. They must all be present. I don't care if they're busy. I'll contact them right away. Suddenly, the Star Alliance's elders received a message. All of the elders, regardless of where they were required to attend the meeting in Starmoon Kingdom. This situation shocked the Star Alliance's members. As a first-rate guild, their development was widespread. The Star Alliance had created branches in several other kingdoms, each one managing themselves on their own. This was the first meeting since they had joined God's domain that required the presence of every elder. Time flowed quickly. Before he knew it, a day had passed in God's domain. Inside the blood refining passage, Sure Feng had killed blood fighters almost without rest. He only took small breaks to recover his exhausted stamina, before returning to grinding blood fighters. After Sure Feng killed another blood fighter, the sound of a system notification suddenly reached his ears. System, the blood refining stone has collected 1,000 points of blood energy. Do you wish to evolve it into a blood refining crystal? There was no guarantee that each blood fighter killed would generate blood energy. The more blood energy Sure Feng accumulated, the less he could collect from the slain blood fighters. Who knew how many blood fighters he had slaughtered throughout the day to collect the 1,000 points of blood energy? Chapter 703, Improved Attributes. Evolve. Sure Feng clicked Confirm. Although he did not know what changes would occur after upgrading the blood refining stone to a blood refining crystal, seeing as he had spent so much time to collect the required blood energy, the crystal should not be an ordinary item. Otherwise it would not have dropped from the nine-headed magic snake. Suddenly the magical black cube in Shifeng's hands crumbled, transforming into a half-transparent, blood-red crystal ball. There were even droplets of dark red liquid flowing within the crystal ball, each containing powerful life force. Why is there so much life force? Shifeng could clearly feel the life inside those droplets of blood. It was only slightly weaker than the water of life. But what kind of treasure was the water of life? Just one drop was enough to cure a crippled NPC. After accumulating a certain amount of the treasured water, one could even use it to revive a dead NPC. Meanwhile, the blood-red crystal in his hands contained over 10 droplets of blood that could rival the water of life. Just what kind of item is this? Unable to hold back his curiosity, Shifeng clicked to check the blood refining crystal statistics. Blood refining crystal, dark gold rank item. Can absorb the life force of powerful monsters the wielder kills. After accumulating 100 points of blood energy, player can produce a drop of life essence. Can accumulate a maximum of 1000 drops of life essence. Each drop can increase a player's stamina and concentration recovery speed for 2 hours. Current drops of life essences, 12/1000. Is this the true power of the blood refining crystal? Shifeng was shocked when he read the statistics. In God's domain, it was common knowledge that players required rest to recover their stamina and concentration. Hence, players could not grind for long periods. They had to take breaks. Although there were some tools that sped recovery such as food and field tents, those items could only be used outside of combat. Shifeng also knew of a few items that could recover stamina and concentration during combat. However, these items were extraordinarily difficult to obtain. The water of life was one such item. However, using the water of life to grind for longer periods was no less than extravagant. Not a single guild in God's domain could afford such a waste. The other tools were similar to the water of life, in which they were extraordinarily valuable and exceedingly difficult to obtain. Even if a large guild mobilized its forces, it would barely obtain enough items to supply for a handful of experts. Shifeng had never expected the nine-headed magic snake to drop such a valuable item. With the blood refining crystal, he could recover stamina and concentration without having to stop his slaughter. With this, he could grind far longer than other players. Unfortunately, accumulating life essence was a slow process. At most, 2 or 3 players could use the crystal continuously. With the blood refining crystal, I can save plenty of time. Due to Shifeng's reliance on techniques to kill the blood fighters, he consumed far more stamina and concentration than usual. Moreover, the blood fighters in the blood refining passage were not easy opponents. In an intense battle, a player's stamina and concentration consumption rate increased by several folds. Hence, the blood refining crystal was a convenient item for Shifeng right now. Following which, Shifeng poured a drop of life essence into his hand and drank it. Suddenly, Shifeng felt his body relax, the fatigue he had accumulated from constant battle vanishing instantly. His mind also cleared. This really is a great item. Originally, Shifeng had intended to take a break after fighting for a little while longer. Now it seemed that he no longer needed rest. After fighting the blood fighters for over a day, Shifeng was very familiar with their attack patterns. His swordsmanship had also become far more precise. During battle, Shifeng would try to discard extra attacks, pursuing efficiency. As a result, his swordplay became much faster, and he could now defeat the blood fighters with minimal effort. Shifeng had never considered these techniques before. He had only focused on ending the monsters he fought regardless of how much power he had to expend. After reaching the blood refining passage, however, he had to improve his attack efficiency if he wanted to kill his opponents quickly due to his inability to use skills. It was as if a new world had opened up to Shifeng. Initially, when facing 4 blood fighters simultaneously, Shifeng had needed over 150 moves to finish off just one of the undead. Among these 150 moves, more than 50 were used to defend himself against incoming attacks. He had to defend himself because he was unfamiliar with his surrounding, and as a result, this allowed the blood fighters to launch counterattacks. However, as the number of fights against the elites increased, he began to require fewer movements to defend himself. Now he could defeat a blood fighter with roughly 130 attacks. For a time, Shifeng's leveling efficiency increased significantly. As time passed, Shifeng had become completely immersed in his swordsmanship. He no longer needed to think about how to streamline his attacks. Once he ran out of stamina, he just needed to drink a drop of life essence before returning to battle. Only after Shifeng reached level 35, and a golden glow illuminated his body, did he finally regain his senses. After training for so long, I should be at my limit. It's time to challenge the Blood Warrior again. Shifeng smiled faintly as he looked at his newly improved attributes. When he reached level 35, the Golden Stigmata increased all of his basic attributes by 5 points and provided 10 free attribute points. Meanwhile, as a Tier 1 player, he received 8 free attribute points every time he leveled. The Abyssal Blade also provided a bonus of 2 free attribute points. After reaching level 35, Shifeng received 20 free attribute points in total and 5 points into all of his basic attributes. Furthermore, his Tier 1 set equipment, the 7 Luminaries Ring, and the Heavenly Dragon's Breath had also received a significant boost to their attributes. During Shifeng's previous fight with the Blood Warrior, it was obvious that he lacked sufficient speed. Hence, he placed all 20 free attribute points into agility. Despite rising by only 1 level, Shifeng had improved his attributes almost as much as if he had equipped an additional piece of level 35 dark gold equipment. His strength had also improved. Blood Refining Passage, Blood Warrior's Combat Area. The Blood Warrior wielding a silver two-handed saber appeared once more. Since Shifeng had already experienced the special elite, he would not allow the Blood Warrior to take the initiative to attack. Taking a step forward, he dashed towards the Blood Warrior. Previously, such an action would have been suicidal. With the Blood Warrior's attack speed, Shifeng had not been able to defend against its attack. It would have been utterly impossible to dodge the special elite's fearsome saber. In the next moment, the Blood Warrior tightened its grip on its saber. It then slashed forward, sending a streak of silver light plunging towards Shifeng. Boom! The silver two-handed saber missed Shifeng. Shifeng had long since predicted the trajectory of the Blood Warrior's swing. Even before the Blood Warrior prepared to strike, Shifeng had prepared to dodge. If he had only begun dodging after the Blood Warrior launched its attack with his current attributes, he would never have evaded it. Even blocking it would have been a challenge. Shifeng did not immediately launch a counterattack after evading the first slash. Instead, he abruptly fell backward. Wah! Another streak of silver light cut across the crown of Shifeng's head. Only after Shifeng evaded 5 strikes did he send a slash of his own at the Blood Warrior's side, causing a critical damage of -2,174. Although the strike had forced the special elite to retreat by half a step, it had not affected its combat power in the slightest. Even so, this result excited Shifeng. In his previous battle against the Blood Warrior, he had not been able to resist the undead in the least. Now, however, he managed to damage to the special elite. At this point, grinding away the Blood Warrior's 240,000 HP was only a matter of time. Chapter 704, Final Trump Card. The Blood Warrior launched one violent attack after the other, whereas Shifeng desperately dodged and blocked the special elite's attacks. As they exchanged more attacks, Shifeng refined his own actions, thinking of ways to deal faster damage. -1,042. -2,108. -1,071. One damage after another appeared above the Blood Warrior's head, its HP decreasing at a rate visible to the naked eye. Initially, Shifeng had to dodge 5 attacks before finding the opportunity to strike. However, as he refined his movements and gained a firmer grasp on his situation, he was soon able to attack after dodging every 4 attacks. In less than 5 minutes, the Blood Warrior's HP fell to 30%. In contrast, Shifeng had yet to receive any damage. Just as the Blood Warrior's HP fell below the 30% threshold, the crimson flames burning inside the skeleton's eye sockets turned dark green. The two-handed saber in its hands disappeared, and in its place 2 long swords appeared in each hand. Damn it! Shifeng scowled at the change. There was a qualitative difference between avoiding a two-handed weapon and 2 one-handed weapons. While the Blood Warrior had used a two-handed weapon, it signified that its attacks carried absolute power. A single strike was capable of sending him flying. However, as long as he managed to evade its attacks, victory would be within his grasp. Now that the Blood Warrior used two one-handed weapons, however, the situation had changed. Although the power of attacks would lessen, it could double the number of attacks it dished out. To Shifeng, who had relied on evasion to survive until now, this was an extremely disadvantageous situation. The Blood Warrior's sudden transformation had caught Shifeng off guard. When the Blood Warrior launched its first attack, its blade moved as fast as the two-handed sword had, as fast as lightning. If he had not predicted the attack by the movements of the Blood Warrior's joints, it would have struck him. Against this first strike, Shifeng abruptly turned sideways, allowing the silver longsword to brush past his chest. Just as Shifeng thought of taking a step backward, the Blood Warrior's other sword arrived before him. Dang! Sparks scattered. The abyssal blade in Shifeng's hand barely blocked the Blood Warrior's fatal strike in time. As a result, however, Shifeng was forced to retreat by 4 steps before he could stabilize his body. Meanwhile, a damage of over -400 points appeared above his head. The Blood Warrior's destructive power with a one-handed sword was much weaker than with a two-handed saber. If Shifeng had a choice, however, he would very much prefer the saber-wielding Blood Warrior. I can only try my best. Shifeng quickly adjusted his footwork, using void steps as he saw the Blood Warrior coming in for a second wave of attacks. Suddenly, Shifeng vanished from the Blood Warrior's sight. Shifeng had no intentions of giving up this fight. Currently, the Blood Warrior had less than 70,000 HP remaining. If he strived for a little longer, he could defeat the special elite. Whether it was against players, monsters, or NPCs, void steps was a very effective technique. Only void steps was not suitable against high-tiered monsters and NPCs, as these individuals possessed domains. The owner of a domain could grasp every movement within their domain. They had greater perception than what their vision provided, rendering void steps useless. However, the Blood Warrior was merely a special elite. Moreover, it was neither a high-intellect NPC nor a high-tiered monster. It could not cope with Shifeng's void steps at all. After Shifeng used void steps, he frequently disappeared and reappeared. Each time he appeared, he would inflict a significant amount of damage to the Blood Warrior. And every time the Blood Warrior tried to retaliate, Shifeng would vanish, preventing the Blood Warrior from locking onto its target. Although this move seemed like a bug, this was Shifeng's final trump card, which he normally avoided using. Void steps combined of both footwork and breathing techniques. The burden on its user's stamina was only secondary. Its main downfall was the massive stress it placed on its user's concentration. Even though Shifeng's brain activity had improved significantly, utilizing void steps frequently was a double-edged sword. He did not know when the technique would backfire and hurt him. Shifeng used void steps more than 40 times in a row, breaking his previous record. Meanwhile, the Blood Warrior's HP fell rapidly. Now it had less than 40,000 HP remaining. Shifeng was also dizzy after using the advanced footwork so many times. He felt indescribable fatigue. However, if that were all, he could force himself through it. Fortunately, before the battle began, Shifeng had drunk a drop of life essence. Hence, both his stamina and concentration recovered rapidly right now. Otherwise, he would not have been able to stay conscious. 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits. The Blood Warrior could not resist in the least. It could only endure Shifeng's assault silently, its HP decreasing by the thousands. Very quickly, the Special Elite's remaining HP plunged from 40,000 to 30,000, from 30,000 to 20,000, and then finally falling to a critical state. In the end, Shifeng suddenly appeared behind the Blood Warrior and thrust his sword through its back, destroying its final strand of HP. I've really pushed myself to the limit this time. When Shifeng saw the Blood Warrior fall, he breathed a sigh of relief and slumped on the ground. If the battle had gone on any longer, Shifeng would have exhausted himself, losing his ability to use void steps and his control over his body. He would become sheep at the slaughter. Fortunately, he had succeeded. After the Blood Warrior died, Shifeng's experience bar increased by a sizable chunk. The EXP he obtained from the Special Elite was more than even a level 50 Lord offered. Immediately he reached 9% of level 35. Aside from providing Shifeng with a large sum of EXP, the Blood Warrior also dropped a level 50 Fine Gold Cape. Blood Refining Cape, Fine Gold Rank. Level 50. Equipment requirement: Strength 400, Agility 800. Defense plus 571. Strength plus 68, Agility plus 54, Endurance plus 56. Movement speed +4. Evasion +15. Additional passive skill dash. Conceal, increases the difficulty to perceive the wearer. Additional active skill dash. Lightning flash, appear behind a maximum of 4 targets. Damage increased by 20%. Duration of 5 seconds. Cooldown, 2 minutes. What a good item. Shifeng's eyes shone as he examined the blood-refining cloak. Capes were extremely rare in God's domain. They were even rarer than rings and ornaments. Even now, the only other cape Shifeng had found since joining God's domain in this life, and still used, was the Dark Pursuer's cape. Although the Dark Pursuer's cape provided very minor buffs to his attributes, the skill Silent Steps that the cape offered was very powerful. It could even rival an assassin's Shadow Steps. Only the skill's cooldown was somewhat long. However, if used appropriately, it could set one up for an instant kill. In combat, such a skill was far more valuable than attributes. However, now that he had the blood-refining cape, as soon as he fulfilled the equipment requirements, he would immediately replace the Dark Pursuer's cape. The requirement of level 50 was not a problem to Shifeng as he had the Heavenly Dragon's Breath, which reduced items' level requirements by 10 levels. In other words, he could equip the blood-refining cape once he reached level 40. Although the 7 Luminaries ring also decreased the level requirement of all items by 5 levels, in God's domain, this effect was not stackable. The highest effect would apply. Aside from dropping the blood-refining cape, the Blood Warrior also dropped an ancient gold-rimmed book. The pressure this ancient book radiated even caused Shifeng to shudder with fear. 2 large words graced the book's cover. Solomon's Treasure. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.